Okay, today is October 24th. It's 10:05 in Tucson. That means the reliability of the Gospels by Dr. Mike Licona is going to start soon, and then Tactical Faith by Koukl. Both of these guys know my name, and they're both in my former church right now. Let's see, little Camille Greger, 1,000 Pine Points for being here first and putting a question mark up. I'll explain what's going on. Mishkan, 500 Pine Points, and Vinsus, 86, 250 Pine Points. Welcome on a Saturday morning. Yeah, I forgot. I forgot this was going on because I was invited to this by a former Christian acquaintance. He said, come. But he didn't tell me who was going to be there, and I didn't bother to look it up. If I would have probably bought tickets if I would have known Licona, Koukl, Lennox. Who else is there? It's on this thing. Tomorrow will be, I missed Lennox, and I know who Douglas Axe is. Michael Behe. Warner Wallace is there tomorrow. Oh, and Frank Turk's there tomorrow. I should probably get in my car and put on some pants. No, put on some pants, then get in my car and head over there tomorrow. But the thing is, this is like almost an hour drive for me. But and because of COVID, I don't have tickets. I didn't buy tickets. But I think if I could knock on the window of the church, I think. Well, this particular church is actually like a Mormon church. It doesn't have windows. But if I could say, hey, Turek, you know me, right? Wallace, you know me, right? Licona, we interviewed each other. Greg Koukl, I called you, let me in. Maybe they would do it. But this church, they're trying to sell something here. But this church, I went to from 1998 to 2001. And then 9/11 happened. I think that was the start of me reconsidering a lot of stuff like it was for many people. But I remember with this church, their Calvary Chapel, this is the church, basically the denomination that Mike Winger goes to. Me and Mike Winger went to I used to go to the same type of church as Mike Winger. And they are pretty conservative. I remember being asked to, me and my wife, to lead the college and career group at this church. And guess what happened? They found out that I was not a young earth creationist. And the pastor there, his name was Robert Furrow. I don't know if he's still there. I bet you he is. I should look that up. He said, it went all the way up the chain of command to Pastor Robert Furrow, who said, Doug believes the earth is billions of years old. I don't think he can lead our college and career. And for you Christians listening, that's exactly why I'm an atheist today, right? Because I was hurt in the church. Actually, that did hurt a little bit. It's like, really? And there's a lot of Christians listening who are saying to themselves, "That Doug, sorry that happened to you. That was like Inspired Philosophy is watching right now, and because he's from Tucson as well, and so hey, hi Inspired Philosophy. But yeah, that's stupid, right? Like we're both agreed that's pretty stupid that you don't live. But then again, if you believe that it's fundamental to your beliefs that if the Earth is billions of years old and if evolution could plausibly be true, then the Genesis narrative goes out the window, and why Jesus had to come and save us from our sins goes out the window because of we don't have this original sin problem. Well, then I guess I understand why it's so important to them. But anyhow, it's supposed to have started at 10 o'clock, Michael Licona. And okay, my prediction is that he's not going to say anything I haven't heard 1,000 times, but that's okay. I still want, because he's on the church, he's going to be speaking on the platform where I and my wife would play keyboard and sing, and where I would sing backup and play saxophone. Just because it's on that stage that I used to spend hours and hours on practicing and performing in worship, I thought, hey, let's listen to it again. Let's see what he's trying to sell.
Places in your family. So as I just wrap up here, I want to show you
perfect
where
timing.
You can get the conference discount. Here we go. Here's where you go. I tried to make it easy, so I made it my name as the hyperlink. To get a 10% off discount, including a payment plan on Logos. And by the way,
and if you call now, we'll throw in a set of steak knives.
Own it forever. And here's where you go to. Write this down or take a picture of the big screen right now during the conference. Logos.com/Greg. Logos.com/Greg. If you go there, you will have until Sunday night to be able to get 10% off and a payment.
Doesn't he look like a heavier Jimmy Kimmel?
As soon as you process it, you get an email you can download to your device right away. So you could be using it 5 minutes from now. So thank you so much. Hope you enjoy the conference. I look forward.
Will Camille come on? I'm not opposed to having people come on to talk, but the way I've set up this live stream right now, he wouldn't be able to hear the audio from this. Okay, here we go.
All right, welcome back from break. We'll get cranking here on the next side of it. Thanks again, Titus. That was excellent.
I don't know this guy.
I like to go.
I don't think he was there when I was there.
Trinity 1, Skeptic 0. I like to keep that going. Our next speaker, Dr. Mike Licona, PhD, University of Pretoria. Before that, and I like to try to highlight some strange thing, like when we had Dr. Licona's one of his best friends, Gary Habermas, and people didn't know he was a herpetologist, at the same time. Unique thing about Mike is he plays the saxophone. So
yeah, how ironic. I used to play saxophone on that stage, and Mike Licona plays saxophone.
Friend, please welcome.
It's almost like there's a God.
Oh. Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it, brother. Good morning. Well, it's great to be with you all, and appreciate it, Dan. Hey, Greg, my friend Greg Manette was just talking about Logos Bible software. I just want to say, and I don't make anything off of this by saying this, but I've been a Logos Bible software user for nearly 20 years. It is a fantastic package, and it's wonderful. I carry most of my library with me on my laptop, so it's extremely convenient.
Is Licona South African? No. Licona is American through and through, I believe. Ooh, nice.
Are the Gospels historically reliable?
No. Okay, who's next on the list here? Kidding.
Fundamental question. What do we mean by reliable? Now that might seem like a simple question, but it's really not. Does it mean that in order to be reliable, there cannot be any errors whatsoever? Well, certainly that can't be the case, because if it were, well, then nothing would be historically reliable. Apart from Scripture, you couldn't say anything in the Greco-Roman or any literature would be historically reliable.
This is what, by the way, I paused it here and I can fast forward and stuff, so I think we're safe. But that is a great point Licona's making. What does reliable mean? Does it mean that there's absolutely no mistakes, no errors? Now, this bothers... I can guarantee you this bothers some people listening right now. They're saying, well, wait a minute. When you say reliable, we're not saying 100% truth, 100% error-free, no mistakes. So I'm curious to see how Licona is going to define reliable.
So how many errors would be allowed before it's not historically reliable? 1%, 2%, 5%, 10%?
These percentages were going through my head before you even said this.
And what kind of errors would we allow? How many big ones? Or if you have one big one, would that be the equivalent to 10 or 15 little ones in the insignificant peripheral details? How do you answer that question? And then it's more than that. It's like when you're talking about ancient biography, the genre of ancient biography is different from modern biography. It's got the same word, biography, but they operated by some different literary conventions. They had different objectives.
Yeah, and as Camille said in one of my recent live streams, ancient Roman biography, if they had a primary source, an eyewitness source, they screamed it from the rooftops, "This is my source, look how wonderful this is." But we don't find that in the Gospel of Mark. Mark not once said, "By the way, I got this from Peter."
Whereas today in biography, a modern biographer will try to talk about psychological and cultural and societal, environmental items that led the person to develop into the kind of person they are. Whereas in antiquity, they believed that a person was born with a specific character.
Richard Hunter, this guy is not terrible for a lot of churches because he is very reasonable. He comes across as likable, and he is an expert in New Testament history.
Character didn't develop over time. It's just it manifested itself more over time. So you don't have this psychological thing. That's why in the Gospels as well as other ancient biographies, they usually talk about the person's family, ancestry, and then they launch right into the person's public life, whether it be military, politics, or teacher, whatever. And that's why the Gospels don't talk about the childhood of Jesus. It's not interested in talking about the psychological
Although there are Gospels that talk about the childhood of Jesus, it just didn't make the cut into the canon.
development of that person. That wasn't the objective. The objective of ancient biographers was to take and paint a literary portrait of who that person.
See, I'm glad I didn't get in my car and put on my pants and then get in the car and drive 45 minutes or so to be there in person because I can't stop Licona and make comments. I would have to bring duct tape.
And they would manifest or illuminate who that person was through their words and their deeds. Okay, so they would be selecting the material, and this portrait they're painting, they want you to get an impression of who this person was. So like Plutarch, he's the greatest of all the ancient biographers. When he's writing his life or biography of Marcus Brutus, one of the conspirators who assassinated Julius Caesar, he is painting the portrait of Brutus as a pretty nice guy. He's not brutal like a lot of the other Roman elites were. He wasn't corrupted. But Brutus wasn't innocent on a lot of things. He did some corrupt things. He was brutal at times. But in his biography of Brutus, Plutarch doesn't describe those things. He doesn't include those because it would complicate his literary portrait of Brutus. So you don't get an exact, precise, or I should say, he could be telling all truths about Brutus, but the portrait, the impression we get on who Brutus was, has been airbrushed.
Yeah, okay. Remember what the original question or original point is. Some people have already forgotten by this point. But what does the term reliable mean? And you can tell that there's people like Lydia and Tim McGrew screaming right now. You're saying reliable means a general portrait that reveals some truth. It's not in the details. But isn't it the details? Isn't it the pixels of every part of that portrait that makes the portrait? So if we can't be confident in the pixels of a painting, how do you know the overall portrait is correct?
A modern example, or hypothetical example, I should say, would be let's say you have a modern biographer who's writing a biography on Martin Luther King Jr., and the objective of that biography is to encourage others to help the oppressed. And in doing so, that biographer talks about all the great things in the civil rights movement that
Yes, Ben Green, good observation. Did he just admit that the Gospels ignore the bad aspects of Jesus? This is a point that I often bring up about comparing Christianity with Mormonism. The evidence for Mormonism is so far superior, that's why we can dismiss it so easily. But going back 2,000 years, when we know that what we have has been selected for us to read, like what's the real backstory on Jesus? What did he do on Friday nights when he was 15 years old? Was he out behind the church smoking some Camels?
Martin Luther King Jr. did, but doesn't make mention of his numerous marital infidelities because that would complicate the portrait of MLK Jr. So let's say everything in that biography was correct, was accurate, but those marital infidelities were omitted in order not to complicate the portrait. In other words, the impression we get on who MLK Jr. was has been airbrushed. So if everything's correct, but it's been airbrushed, the impression we get, is it historically reliable? How do you answer that? You could say yes with an asterisk. It requires qualification. So there's a lot that goes behind the question, are the Gospels, or for that matter, any...
Yeah. Is the Gospels inerrant? Yes, with an asterisk. Yeah, that's not going to sit well with a lot of conservative evangelicals.
Any piece of ancient literature historically reliable. And it's a lot to get into. I can't do it right now. So rather than talk about that, I want to give you a simple definition of historically reliable as follows. At the very minimum, historically reliable means that it's preserving an accurate gist of what occurred.
Whoa. Yeah. I can't help it. It's like gist. We know Jesus rose from the dead because of an accurate gist. We know that Jesus commanded the demons to leave a man and go into pigs because of gist. We know that he fed the 5,000 because of gist. We know he claimed to be God when, look at me, you see the Father, because of gist. That for some Christians, that might raise their confidence and yes, we got gist. We should make a t-shirt. The Gospels got the gist, or something like that.
Now I realize that gist can have a variety of meanings to it on like a spectrum, but I'm referring to saying the literature in question gives us the main and essential parts, that they are true. The main and essential parts are true. It's giving us an essentially faithful representation of what occurred. At minimum, it meets that standard. And that would apply not only to the Gospels, but to all ancient literature. When we say something is historically reliable, it at least meets that minimum standard. It might be far better than that, but it at least meets that minimum standard.
Yeah, I wonder what that minimal standard is, though. Is it to say that Jesus was an apocalyptic preacher who traveled around and preached that the kingdom of God is near and then died? Or is the gist that accurate representation that he did all those miracles, that he did die and get put into a tomb, and that he rose 36 hours later?
What I'm going to be addressing in the next few moments are the...
Oh, Corey Melton, why hasn't Apologia featured you yet? Well, one of the reasons why Apologia hasn't featured me yet is because it's all about money. We were trying to negotiate price, and he finally paid me enough. And so this Monday, I think this Monday morning, Apologia will feature PineCreek.
The Gospels, do they at least meet this minimum standard by what we mean by historically reliable? So in the next few moments, what I want to do is I want to give you six reasons to think the Gospels are historically reliable.
Okay, I don't know what these 6 reasons are, I could predict, but I'm curious to know if any of these 6 reasons can be applied to Mormonism. See, this is what I would love to do. I wish I was there. And I could say, before you give these 6 reasons, Dr. Licona, I want everybody in this auditorium to ask themselves. Now, I honestly don't know what he's going to say. This is live. I want you to think in your head if any of these 6 apply to Mormonism.
Number 1, we have good reasons to believe that the author intended to write an accurate account. The first thing we can note is that the Gospels are ancient biographies. Now, not all ancient biographers were so committed to accuracy. So this only takes us so far, but it does tell us that it is a historical genre. They are not written as ancient novels, okay?
Yeah, how in the world do you determine if an author intended to write an accurate account? Well, I'm sure he's going to answer that question. But isn't it, you almost have to get into the psyche of the author to know exactly what his motivations were. Like, one could say that Muhammad and Joseph Smith, they were nuts, but they were sincere, and that they actually intended to write an accurate account of what they experienced.
Characteristics of ancient biography. Here's why the majority of New Testament scholars today regard the Gospels as ancient biographies. Number one, they focus on the main character. When a history is being written, the difference between a biography and a history focuses on an era, an event, or like a government, what's going on, whereas a biography focuses on a person. It's still historical literature, but one is called a history, the other is called a biography. Number two, as I mentioned a few moments ago,
So does Mormonism, does Islam focus on a main character?
ancient biographies, the biographer in ancient biography starts off with the person's ancestry and then launches into the person's public life. Skip over the childhood in most cases. In fact,
Notice the earliest gospel does not talk about Jesus' ancestry. It was only the later gospels that do that. Maybe the later authors realized that, hey, if we want to make this more historical, we got to throw this in.
with Jesus, the only event that's reported about his childhood
And Paul, I don't think, talks about Jesus' ancestry, but that's not, Paul's letters are different, I guess.
is a single event when he was 12 in the Gospel of Luke, that his parents had left from Passover and they're headed back home to Nazareth. And hey, where's Jesus? And they have to go back to Jerusalem. And they see him in the temple at age 12. That's the only event we have of Jesus' childhood. Why not more? Because it's an ancient biography. They're not concerned with the person's childhood.
Not true. It's the only one in the New Testament canon. But what's the name of the gospel that talks about Jesus' childhood and where he kills another child for breaking his sandcastle or something like that? I'm straw manning, okay? I'll give you that. But what's the name of that? The infancy gospels, yes. Wouldn't that be cool if that made it into the New Testament?
Third, the main subject's character, as I mentioned, is illuminated through the words and deeds in that portrait. Okay. Fourth, the length of the biography was typically 10 to 25,000 words. You could fit, almost as a max, as 25,000 words on a scroll. You might be able to fit more in, but typically 10 to 25,000 words on a scroll is what you would get. So you can see the number of Greek words here in each of the Gospels. Mark is the shortest at a little over 11,000 words, and then you have Luke as the longest.
So the number of words in a text helps us determine if it's reliable?
Just at a little over 19,000 words.
It might help you to get to, I guess, the genre that he wants you to. But as Camille said in a prior live stream I did, there are some glaring differences between the Gospels and ancient Roman biography, which I have a feeling he's not going to bring up.
Fit right in with the typical length of biographies. They're not ancient novels. Why do scholars across the board reject that the Gospels aren't ancient novels? That's not to say there aren't any who think that they're novels. Gosh, you'll find a few scholars who deny the Holocaust out there.
Whoa. To say the Gospels might be a story is to say that the Holocaust never happened. How about if we try to be a little more reasonable, Michael Licona, and say that some scholars say that although they believe that the Gospels are mostly story, that there are elements of truth and history in them, just like a lot of other novels. But he just compared, saying that if you say the Gospels are like a story, like a novel, a fictional novel, yeah, there's people who deny the Holocaust.
You could fit them probably on a single hand, count them on a single hand, but there are a few that would do that. There are a few on a single hand, perhaps, that would deny that Jesus ever existed, but typically they aren't respected historians.
Yeah, so this is a strategy to dismiss those who disagree with you. They're fringe. They're crazy. They deny the Holocaust happened.
Ancient novels, why aren't the Gospels ancient novels? Because ancient novels typically involved romances in which two lovers had to overcome obstacles.
Oh, this is so precious. Two lovers have to overcome obstacles. What about the love between Peter and Jesus? What about all the obstacles that the disciples had to overcome? Peter especially denying Jesus 3 times, and in the end. Now, please, if you got it stuck in your head, Michael Licona, that romance has to happen it has to be sexual romance and not a different type of romance, a love, an agape love, Michael Licona. Isn't the Gospel of Mark a story of a man who starts his ministry and his followers, they just don't believe that he is who he says he is, and they're just stupid and they never get it, and they have to see the same miracles over and over again and they still don't get it, and then he finally reaches this climax where he goes through this brutal death and then is risen, and then in Mark at least it's like a cliffhanger. The tomb is empty. Dun dun dun. Stay tuned next week when we find out what happened to Jesus. And then comes the Gospel of Matthew. Man, I tell you, the Gospel of Mark is a romance story, but not between a man and a woman, between a man and 12 men.
And unless you believe the Da Vinci Code.
And look at the Gospel of Mark, the disciple whom I loved.
There's nothing to suggest that Jesus and Mary Magdalene had a fling going on. There's no romance in the Gospels. Also, in ancient novels, typically involve entirely fictitious characters who had supposedly existed in the distant past. That is not what we have in the Gospels.
What did he... Can I rewind this? No, but...
Rarely, but on occasion, you will find an ancient... is what you would get. So you can see the number of Greek words here in each of the Gospels. Mark is the shortest at a little over 11,000 words, and then you have Luke as the longest at a little over 19,000 words, so they fit right in with the typical length of biographies. They're not ancient novels. Why do scholars across the board reject that the Gospels aren't ancient novels? That's not to say there aren't any who think that they're novels. Gosh, you can find a few scholars who deny the Holocaust out there. You could fit them probably on a single hand, count on a single hand, but there are a few that would do that.
I'm rewinding because he says something very important.
They aren't respected historians. Ancient novels, why aren't the Gospels ancient novels? Because ancient novels typically involve romances in which two lovers had to overcome obstacles. And unless you believe the Da Vinci Code, there's nothing to suggest that Jesus and Mary Magdalene had a fling going on. There's no romance in the Gospels. Also, in ancient novels, typically involve entirely fictitious characters who had supposedly existed in the distant past.
Yeah, did Moses and Elijah, do scholars say that Moses existed? It's like, aren't there people in the Gospels that are from the distant past just appear? The Transfiguration, for example? These are the thoughts that'd be going through my head if I was there and I'm just wanting to scream it out.
That is not what we have in the Gospels. Rarely, but on occasion, you will find an ancient novel that mentions a historical character, but there isn't a single ancient novel in which that character had lived within even as recent as a century of the writing of that novel.
I have a feeling Camille's listening to this and saying, well, let me fact check that.
Yet in the Gospels, you've got historical characters like Caesar Augustus, Tiberius Caesar, Herod the Great, Herod Philip, Herod Antipas, Herod Archelaus, Pontius Pilate, Caiaphas, Jesus, John the Baptist. All of these are known to be historical characters and written less than a century.
Do historians say that Joseph of Arimathea is a historical character? I understand why guys like Michael Licona say this to their listeners to help raise confidence, but Christians are not that stupid. They realize that a guy like me can say, aren't there a list of real historical figures found in fictional novels? That's true, right? So how does this help you get to reliability?
Within the time in which these people existed. So it's a biographical genre in which the Gospels are written. Again, you want something like that, of course, but that only goes so far. But it does show that there's historical intent. More of historical intent as we see what the authors themselves say about what they're writing. So in the Gospel of Luke, at the very beginning, it says, it seemed fitting for me as well, having investigated everything carefully from the beginning, to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know for certain the things you have been taught. So Luke is stating he's trying to report the facts about Jesus. You got the Gospel of John, who says, and the one who has seen has testified, his testimony is true, and he knows he is telling the truth, so that you may also believe. John says he is telling the truth about Jesus. That's something that's kind of interesting in the Gospel of Mark. He's talking about
Yeah, it's like, honest, I'm telling you the truth.
Simon of Cyrene, who helped carry Jesus' cross. And he says, and the one who, he says, the soldiers forced the passerby to carry Jesus' cross, Simon of Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus, who was coming in from the country.
Yeah, isn't there another gospel where it says that Jesus carried his own cross?
And many scholars, you'll read it in the commentaries, they will say that this suggests that Mark's audience, the readers or listeners, would have known Alexander and Rufus. And so they would have known about their father, Simon of Cyrene, and go, oh, yeah, we know him. We know who you're talking about there.
Yeah, most of the Gospel of Mark, it's assumed that the readers already have a general idea of what the story is about.
There's no contemporary competing portraits of Jesus outside the Gospels, at least within a short period of time.
Yeah, I wonder why that is.
So just a little timeline here. You've got in the first century, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they present a portrait of Jesus. He is the divine Son of God. Then you come into the second century, you have the Edgerton Papyrus, you have the Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Peter, Gospel of Mary. These come around the middle of the second century and later. They present a little bit different portrait, but again, they're second century, mid and late second century.
Notice where he dates Mark around 50 to 70, but he himself has said the majority of the people who dated during that 20-year range dated between 65 and 70. I think the number 80% comes to mind, which is important because that puts the prophecy of Jesus kind of in jeopardy.
Around 200, between 200 and later you've got the Gospel of Philip and then the secret Gospel of Mark around the year 1958, which seems to have been a fraud, a forgery.
Yeah, it seems to be a fraud, sort of like that first century Mark fragment, right, Michael Licona, that your friend Habermas preached that was there.
So we have good reasons to think that they intended to write accurate history. Second, the authors chose their sources judiciously. They just weren't haphazard in taking any source out there.
How does he know this, that they chose their sources? How does he know this? I'm sure he'll tell us.
So according to the traditional authorship of the Gospels.
Yeah, according to... Okay, now for the next few minutes, for you Protestant evangelicals listening right now, Mike Licona is going to become a Roman Catholic. Here it goes.
Mark got his information from Peter. He wrote down what he recalled Peter saying.
Ooh. Mike Licona, I got a question for you. Why doesn't Mark tell us that? If Peter was one of the great disciples of Jesus, and if Mark got his information directly from Peter, wouldn't he boast about this? Can you please answer that question for the congregation in the church, please?
If that's true, that's pretty cool. Luke, most scholars think that he got his information. He's using Mark as a primary source, and he is supplementing that. And remember, Luke says that there were many who had written accounts, and he's relying on what eyewitnesses and those who had known the eyewitnesses are saying. So he's getting his information.
But note what Luke doesn't say. It does not say that Luke interviewed eyewitnesses himself. That's very important for Christians to realize this, because even, internal critique, reading what it says. Read what it says. Don't have in your mind, this implies that he sat down with people who actually saw it. It doesn't actually say that.
From Mark. Then you've got what's called the hypothetical Q source. Now, how many have heard of Q? You've even heard it mentioned. Okay, a lot of you. Let me explain what Q is.
Isn't it Q from Star Trek?
It's a hypothetical source based on, now I'm going to oversimplify this, but typically most scholars today think that Mark was the first gospel written, and that Matthew...
Camille Gregor says in the livestream chat, question, was Peter still alive when Mark wrote his gospel? Depends which early Christian author you read. Eusebius has that contradiction in the first 5 books of his history. Yeah, that's a great question. If Peter was still alive when the Gospel of Mark was written, why do we need Mark to write the Gospel of Mark? Peter could have written the Gospel of Mark. Or was Peter just so illiterate that he couldn't do it? And so, did Peter, if he was alive when the Gospel of Mark was written, could he say, hey, Mark, okay, got your pen ready? Yeah, write this down. But don't tell anybody I'm telling you to say this. Just let's leave this as a mystery. Don't tell anybody that I'm your source.
And Luke used Mark as their primary source and then supplemented it with their own either eyewitness testimony or other sources that they had. So if you see almost verbatim recollection of facts in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, scholars typically think that they're using Matthew and Luke are using Mark as their primary source there.
Yeah, Matthew is using. Okay, Christians, please help. I know I say this a lot, but I really need help on this. And this is something I didn't think of when I was a Christian, but you believe Matthew was a disciple of Jesus, yes? Yes, PineCreek, we believe that. And yet, you believe Matthew was the author of the Gospel of Matthew, right? Yes, we believe that. And yet, Matthew, who was a direct disciple of Jesus, used Mark, 60-70% of the time to write his gospel, who was not a direct eyewitness. So Matthew is using Mark, and Mark is using Peter. Matthew is using Mark, and Mark is using Peter. So Matthew's using Peter, but Matthew was there as well. Why wouldn't Matthew just use Matthew? Good question, PineCreek. I don't know, but I still love Jesus. Okay.
But what happens when you have virtually verbatim repetition between Matthew and Luke, but it's not even in Mark? They can't be using Mark. Well, you've got one of three options. Either Matthew and Luke are using a common drawing from a common source, or Luke is using Matthew, or Matthew is using Luke. Well, most New Testament scholars today think that Matthew and Luke are using a common source that we no longer have. And so the German scholar who came up with this hypothesis, he what do you call this hypothetical source? Well, the German word for source is Quelle. So you just abbreviate that as Q. That's all Q is. It's not Gnostic source or anything. It's just a hypothetical source that Matthew and Luke would have used. So now some scholars...
So we don't have the sources. That Q source does not exist. I mean, we don't have it, and we don't have the originals. So it's just, I know this is asked so many times of Christians, but if the authority of God's word is so important, you would think a simple miracle like preserving it would have been okay. Like if you can easily feed 5,000 people with one fish, if you can easily walk on water because you're God, if you can easily raise a man from the dead, many men from the dead. But pieces of paper preserving is a difficult one for Yahweh.
Scholars think that Luke used Matthew, or Matthew, a very small minority think Matthew used Luke. They might be right. We just don't know. It's all what's called the synoptic problem, trying to figure all this out, okay? But most scholars today think the Q source. And then they would say that Luke drew some information from Paul, especially in the book of Acts, and then other eyewitnesses. John, the traditional authorship is that he was one of the 12 disciples, and of course he was an eyewitness. And then you've got Matthew, traditional, today...
Yeah, some Christians believe the author of the Gospel of John is actually Lazarus, the disciple who Jesus loved. And at the end of the Gospel of John, if he is the author, he refers to himself in the third person. Okay.
Most scholars think that he used Mark as a source and Q and at least one other, which could have been eyewitness testimony from Matthew to supplement. Number 3, the author used sources responsibly. Do we have evidence that the authors of the Gospels used their sources responsibly?
I can tell. Camille's salivating in the live stream chat right now.
Responsibly. Well, here we can compare how Plutarch and Josephus use their sources. This is interesting to do. Josephus and Plutarch give us unique opportunities because we've got some of their sources. And so we can see how they use those sources. And we see that they will adapt their sources, they edit them, they will supplement their sources.
I wonder if Licona, hey Camille, if you can hear me, I wonder if Licona changed these slides after watching our live stream. I wonder if it would be so hilarious if that's true, that he actually had to tweak some of the things he said and in this presentation after watching what you said.
But they stay fairly close to their sources. Now, we can do that with the Gospels as well, and we can compare how, let's say, Matthew and Luke use Mark, and we see that they stay closer to Mark than what Josephus and Plutarch does with their sources. So that's pretty cool. Why are they doing that? Technically, if they're writing good biography, they ought to adapt their sources, paraphrase them more. They shouldn't do verbatim repetition. That was a no-no. But a lot of times...
Well, wait a minute. Typically, that's a no-no, but yet the Gospel of Mark is still in the genre, or no, Matthew and Luke are still in the genre of ancient Roman biography, if it's a no-no to quote people verbatim? I'm confused. Camille, help me with this.
Sometimes Matthew and Luke do that with Mark. Why? Well, maybe it's because they had such high regard for Mark that they took minimal liberties in.
So Matthew, a direct disciple of Jesus, had such high regard for a non-disciple of Jesus, and so quoted him verbatim.
Editing his account. Number 4, we want to know that the authors or their sources were capable.
Large-scale conjecturing. Is Matthew 27 large? Matthew 27, Mike Licona, is that large-scale conjecturing? Having hundreds of people get out of their graves and walk around Jerusalem? No, that's not conjecture, Doug. That's apocalyptic imagery.
Of recalling history accurately. Now, when we're talking about Plutarch, and he's regarded as the greatest of the ancient biographers, this isn't the Plutarch of the Hunger Games. This is the Plutarch that was born right around the year 40 and died just after the year 120. So he's living.
Yeah, Camille says they had such high regard for Mark. That's what Licona calls ad hocness. It's like comments like they had high regard for Mark is Licona crawling into the brains of these ancient historians and knowing what they were thinking, knowing that they looked at the writings of the Gospel of Mark and saying, we have high regard for this. We respect this. Maybe they were just lazy, and so that's why they copied Mark. That's another good explanation.
Same time as the apostles, he's writing shortly after the Gospel of John, and he's writing in the same language. He wrote over 60 biographies, of which 48 have survived, and we learn a lot from the ancient world from Plutarch. Plutarch, he talks, when he's writing his biographies of Caesar, Cicero, Brutus, Antony, and some others, he's writing within 140 years of the events he's describing. And he says he's got good information, good sources, so he can report on these.
Yeah, he says he has good sources, and I believe he even names them.
Later on, he's going to write on Theseus, the legendary founder of Greece, and Romulus, the legendary founder of, I'll bet you'll never guess. That's right, Rome. But they are alleged to have existed 800 to 1,000 years before Plutarch is writing. That's a lot further removed from Plutarch. So here's what Plutarch says. After he writes these, he's already written about Caesar, Cicero, and Antony, and Brutus, and others, and he says, now that I have traversed those periods of time which are accessible to probable reasoning and which afford basis for a history dealing with facts. In other words, he has good sources, and I can...
he's quoting from Plutarch here, right? You notice the first person, now that I have traversed, I might well say...
deal with these things and write accurate biographies on them. Now that I've done this, I might well say of the earlier periods of which I'm about to write, Theseus and Romulus, what lies beyond is full of marvels and unreality, a land of poets and...
Notice that Gospel Mark doesn't talk like that.
...fabulists of doubt and obscurity. May I therefore succeed in purifying fable, making her submit to reason and take on the semblance of history. What Plutarch is saying here is, I had really good sources for these other biographies I've written, but...
Just imagine, Licona, just hear yourself. Wouldn't it be so much better? Like, let's just say the Gospel of Mark is great history. Wouldn't it be even better if Mark said, like Plutarch said, I have a great source. People, listen to me. My source is a disciple of Jesus named Peter, who walked with Jesus for like a year and saw all these things. And so my source is Peter. Wouldn't that be much better than what we actually have?
Now, Theseus and Romulus, they're like 800 to 1,000 years ago. I don't have good sources for them. They're just fables and myths. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take those sources and I'm going to rewrite them to make them sound like accurate history, but don't be under any illusion that they are. Because he's writing about people who had lived 800 to 1,000 years before. So there's large-scale conjecturing when it comes to Theseus and Romulus, but not with these others who had lived within 140 years. What about the Gospels? When the Gospels are written, they're written within 20 to 65 years of Jesus' life. The eyewitnesses are still alive.
How do you know that they're still alive? Some of them probably were, but some of them were probably dead when the Gospels are written, right? That's really reasonable to say. And since the Gospel authors don't say, I, Mark, a protege of Peter who's still alive or is dead, it doesn't say anything like that. the odds, the probabilities, and history is about probabilities, the probabilities that someone who walked with Jesus, who was about Jesus's age, would be dead by the time Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were written. It's below 50%. You have to give me that. I'm not saying it's impossible that they were alive. I'm just saying the odds are they were dead. And anybody who could say that the Gospels, that's false, the odds are they were dead. More than 50% chance. Because they would have to be over 60, 70, 80, 90 years old 2,000 years ago when there was no penicillin. But this type of talk, I don't know, it seems like it has no effect on Christians.
Many of them are when these Gospels are being written. So there's living memory of Jesus when all these Gospels are being written. There's no need for large-scale conjecturing. So they had the ability to write accurate history. Number 4, the author or their sources were capable of recalling stories accurately. We talked about the large-scale conjecturing, but also we have the item of memory. Now, of course, memory is not perfect. We all forget things. We misremember things. At least that's what my wife tells me. I didn't get that right. And my wife has a better memory than me on a lot of things. She can remember details.
Yes, you're exactly right, Vinsus86. I have heard Christians, they realize what I just said was true about odds are that anybody who walked with Jesus, saw Jesus, would probably be dead definitely by the time John was written, but even by the time Mark. But they have to say, oh, the disciples, they were probably, especially John, he was like 15 years old when he walked with Jesus. It's like, well, what if that's not the definition of ad hoc? I don't know what is. It's like they have to force the age. What if John was older than Jesus? It's game over then, right? Like if Jesus was 30 when he died, or 33, and if John was older, let's say 40, and if John was written, 40 years later, 50 years later, you're saying that John lived to 90, 100 years old? 110? Really? Okay.
Details on things a lot better than I can, like what was said at certain times by a certain person. Memory, I got you on that. Yeah, I understand what you're saying here with your laughs. But memory is generally reliable. Now, several years ago, I was in a doctor's office, and I just had an appointment. I came out of the office, and I'm walking out, and the office is just jammed with other patients. And there was this one guy, he was an old guy, and he was wearing his baseball cap, and it had a B-29 Super Fortress embroidered in it. So he's a World War II vet. And my wife and I, we love World War II stuff. We just can't get enough of it, watching documentaries and movies on World War II. And so I saw this guy, and I'm thinking, that's just amazing. And I walked out of the doctor's office, and then I just couldn't let it go. And so I came back in, and I walked up to the guy, and I said, "Sir, did you fly on a B-29 in World War II?" And he said, "I sure did, son." I said, "Wow, you must have some amazing stories." And he said, "Yeah, I was in the Pacific Theater, and I'll never forget the native women on the island on which we were stationed. They had a horrible odor to them." So here he was, decades later, more than half a century later, and he could remember that these women stunk.
Yeah, okay. I wonder what Jesus smelled like. It's like, and I wonder if we had a time machine and we could write down everything that this World War II veteran said, and then take that time machine and go back and compare what he said to what actually happened. What % accuracy rate do you think this World War II veteran would have? Don't you think these stories, as he retold them to anybody who would listen, because a lot of people love to hear from World War II vets what they actually went through, how much do you think it would be embellished?
How many of you were old enough to remember 9/11? Okay, lots of you. Do you remember what the weather was like on that day? What was it?
Yeah, I do.
Well, of course, it's Tucson, you know.
Yeah, I was in Tucson when 9/11 happened. It was, I think I woke up at 5:30, 6 a.m., which was around 8:39. Turned on the TV. It was a sunny day.
Sunny. It was sunny everywhere in the U.S. Okay? Here it is. You remember what the weather was like on 9/11 19 years ago. Now, how many of you remember what the weather was like?
So you can see where he's going with this. When there's something amazing happens, you tend to remember the details.
September 11th this year, just a little over a month ago. Yeah, it was hot. It's Tucson. Yeah. Okay, but I ask this almost anywhere else in the country, and they'll say, I don't know. Why is it that we can remember what the weather was like on 9/11 19 years ago, but we can't remember, you can, of course, down here in Tucson, but we can't remember what it was like a little over a month ago, 5 weeks ago.
But do you remember what you ate for breakfast on the morning of 9/11? Do you remember what you wore, what color shirt you wore on the morning of 9/11? I doubt if people would remember that. Hey, thank you for the donation, Tony D. Last night as I came home from the clubs, I think I may have met Jesus. The guy came out of nowhere. He had tattoos and told me that I needed to take up yoga. I was a little out of it, though. Yeah, I don't think that was Jesus, Tony D, but thank you for the donation.
Because we tend to remember things in which either we were involved or that impact us emotionally. In November 1965, you had a battle at the Yadrang River Valley in Vietnam. It was the first engagement of U.S. forces with North
Is that Mel Gibson?
Vietnamese army. This is recounted in the movie We Were Soldiers, starring Mel Gibson and Sam Elliott. And it was based on a book written by Lieutenant Colonel Halmore, that's represented by Mel Gibson in the movie, and Joe Galloway, who was a combat reporter. They wrote a book, and then the movie was made out of it. And so it talks about these harrowing 5 days of battle that took place. There were a lot of American casualties involved, and it's a great story. It's a fantastic movie. And so Joe Galloway, this combat reporter, the real one.
Yeah, he's telling a story here, but there's a bigger point that's being missed. You can have a perfectly recalled memory of an event from your brain. That doesn't mean that event actually happened. Correct? You can remember something and it's in your brain, and that memory could have been real in your head, but not real external to you, is my point. In other words, you can have been out of your mind. Or sincerely wrong.
A documentary called Vietnam in HD. And my wife and I were watching this a few years ago, and in the very first episode, he appears there, and he's talking about his experience during those 5 days. And at one point, he says something. It's a 1-minute clip, and I said, that's amazing. And so I got that 1-minute clip I want to show you. Here it is.
By the way, great.
Let's say that you had been with Jesus, you had traveled with him. Maybe you were one of his disciples, maybe you were one of the women followers, and you had actually seen him give sight to a guy who had been born blind. You saw him take a person who had been paralyzed for years and heal him so that he could get up and take up his bed and walk. You saw him walk on water. You saw him raise a dead person. You saw him engage the Jewish leadership in arguments. You saw him crucified, and shortly after, you saw him raised from the dead and in perfect health. Do you think that would leave an impression on you that was as deep and lasting as those 5 days had on Joe Galloway?
And do you think, Dr. Licona, that if 500 people, 1,000 people would have seen something like that, don't you think we would have more than 4 Gospels and plus Paul's letters? Don't you think we would have many more testimonies that we could find in the historical record? Don't you think, Dr. Licona, that if it is true that the temple curtain was torn into 2, that we would have many more sources, ancient sources, talking about it? That if dead people did walk into Jerusalem, we would have people talking about it? The Gospels say that what Jesus did was known all throughout Judea and Syria. Don't you think that historians of that time would have at least written about it? Don't you think that we would have contemporary evidence, things written while Jesus was alive about these things, if they were so powerful? His whole point here is that these events are so powerful that people would remember them correctly. That's his point. But if these events are so powerful and so amazing, don't you think it would have been recorded right there, then and now. It's like, by the way, I was in Jerusalem yesterday, and you're never going to believe what I saw. I saw this man. They called him Jesus. He fed 5,000 people with one loaf and fish. He walked on water. I saw him raise Lazarus from the dead the other day, last week. Amazing stuff. But we don't have that. Well, we have it in the Gospel of John, for example, with Lazarus. And that's it. Amazing events, correctly recalled from memory because they were amazing, but yet only one found in one place, or maybe two sources.
That's Jesus' deeds. What about his words? You know, most of us don't think about this, but Jesus was an itinerant preacher.
Yes.
He's not like my friend Adam, a pastor, who was very kind and bought me a cup of coffee before here. And Adam, as a pastor, he's got to come up with a new sermon every week, a different sermon every week.
No, you just borrow them off of YouTube.
An itinerant speaker like myself, Frank Turk, we were talking about this the other day, my buddy Frank, he said, you know, we've got maybe a dozen or so talks, and we just give them the same talk in Tucson as we gave in wherever we were the week before or the month before that. We give the same ones. We don't have to come up with a new talk every time because it's a different audience every time.
Yeah, it's sort of like what comedians do.
Jesus was an itinerant speaker. He probably had a dozen or so messages, and he taught those messages over and 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 over. And of course, his disciples, then he sends them out because they've heard him all these times, and you've heard the best way to learn something is to teach it. Some of them probably took notes. It could very well be that Matthew took notes. He took down the teachings of Jesus, and that is the Q source we have. I think there's a good possibility of that. You've got this, they hear it, they go out, and they're teaching the same things over and 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 over. They come back, they debrief Jesus, and he says, hey guys, guess what? Now let's go to our next level. Do you know that when you're talking to Gentiles, you can adjust these parables a little bit and the stories in order to do a cultural translation and appeal to them more and communicate with them better than when you're
Did he just admit that some of the parables were adjusted?
doing with Jews because you can just change up things? And so he teaches them and he says the same stuff over and over and over and over and over. And then he rises from the dead. He leaves them after a while. And now for the next several decades, they're teaching the same things over and over. And you get the message. You get the idea.
Yeah, if it's taught over, and if certain parables, like the parable of the talents, you know, the three men get different amounts of money and so forth, and then the servant comes back and asks what you've done with that money. Licona himself says that when you compare that parable in two different gospels, you can tell that one borrowed from another guy, another author, and got it wrong and messed it up. Got the math wrong. If these parables were taught over and over and over and over, why would the gospel author mess that up? And Licona himself even admits this. He won't use the phrase messed up, but he'll admit that this is a parable that the author kind of got wrong. But he heard it over and over and over again, right?
Jesus' teachings is not something they heard just once and they're trying to recall 35 years later. They're teaching the stuff all the way up until the time, and even after the Gospels.
You notice he admitted 35 years later? Even Licona believes that the Gospel of Mark was probably written after 65 AD.
Are being written. Patrick Henry's famous liberty or death speech. Do you know that there's only 2 eyewitnesses of that who recounted them later? There's no notes that have survived from Patrick Henry of what he said on that day. The only way we know what he said are 2 eyewitnesses who were trying to recall it from memory 41 years later. Now maybe he said, give me liberty or give me death and so forth. But the rest of it has been reconstructed based on their memories. They've taken it and the guy who reconstructed it took a lot of liberties in reconstructing what that actually was said in that. He's given us a gist of what occurred based on what those 2 eyewitnesses were recounting.
Yeah, I'm hearing a tension here. On one hand, remember how this started. Michael Licona said, we can know that the gist is reliable. But if the gist is reliable, and that's all we can say, the portrait is reliable, what about those pixels that make up the portrait? If it's true what Michael Licona said, that these things were told over and over, and this was solidified in their mind because of these amazing events, then why can't you stand up there, Licona, and boldly pronounce that not only is the gist reliable, but the details are reliable? Is it just me? It's him, right? Is it me? No, it's him. It's Licona, right? Like there's a friction going on here, even within Licona. You can't have it both ways. You can't say the gist is reliable and the details are also reliable. Like, why even use the word gist? Oh, I'm hearing Lydia McGrew's in my left earpiece here. She's applauding me. Yeah, no problem, Lydia. You're welcome. You're welcome.
41 years later, I can tell you that we can have more confidence that the Gospels are preserving what Jesus said than when we read about Patrick Henry's liberty or death speech.
Whoa.
That's pretty cool. So,
yeah, really? If I were to, Jesus said, Lazarus, you stinketh, come out of the grave, come out of the tomb and walk, something like that. That was a historical, reliable writing in the Gospel of John? Really? Ask yourself, Christians, if you found a text that was not from the Bible that said a guy said to a dead guy, come out of the grave and walk. You would believe it? I don't think so. I really don't think you would believe it just because it's written on a piece of paper. If you don't believe it there, why do you believe it in the Gospel of John? Answer me that. Well, Doug, because we got a cumulative case. Mm-hmm. But once you start picking those things apart, claim by claim by claim, you would not believe it if it was in any other religion, any other historical record. But you believe these amazing claims because there's something else going on, like flying trash can lids. That's the real issue.
We're certainly capable of reporting accurate history. Number 5.
They were capable of recording accurate history. How do you know this when your own text says that a lot of them were illiterate and not educated, right? Like, how many people here with a high school diploma or even less, how many people here who are nobody in here should be in grade 4 or 5 or 6, but if you're illiterate in the United States, how many of you are capable of writing reliable historical records?
Verify numerous reported items in the literature. Let me just give you a few reasons for thinking we can do this with the Gospels. Many of the items reported agree with existing background knowledge. It's just like what we heard from our previous.
This is rich. Many items agree with existing background knowledge. What's our existing background knowledge of people rising from the dead? What's our existing background knowledge of people walking on water? Huh.
Lecture here on the archaeological evidence with the Israelis or the Jews leaving Egypt, okay, the Exodus. So a lot has to do with verisimilitude based on what the evidence that we have, our background knowledge. We've got this with the Gospels as well. So, for example, when it comes to names, we find a lot of the same names that we know existed.
Oh, this is some Joakim coming out of Licona right now.
At that time. So Palestinian Jewish names in late antiquity, Tal Ilan, an Israeli, and Richard Bauckham, a New Testament scholar, have done extensive research on this, and they find that a lot of the names that we have in the Gospels were common names of Palestine.
If a lot of the names that we have in the Quran were common names of that time period and area, does that make the Quran more true, more reliable historically? These are the types of questions you have to ask Christians.
Palestinian Jews in that period, and not those of diaspora Jews, those who were outside of Palestine. They had.
If the names in the Book of Mormon were more common for that time period and era, does that make the Book of Mormon more likely to be reliable?
Other names that they used. The names we find in the Gospels are those who were within Palestine, Judea at that point. They also appear with roughly the same frequency in the Gospels as we find in the extra-biblical data, inscriptions and other things like Josephus and Philo. And this suggests that the Gospel authors were well acquainted with Palestine and Judea in that period. Then you've got persons.
Do you think Joseph Smith was well acquainted with the area that he wrote from? That he knew how to go from point A to point B, which roads to take? This type of defense, in my opinion, if you're a Christian, you should avoid. You should run from, it is stupid. Because there are historical narratives that you deem false that do the same thing. So if it's not a good reason for the Book of Mormon, if it's not a good reason for the Quran, it's not a good reason for you. Unless you want a special plead. And then, by all means, say it.
As mentioned in the Gospels, these were people who actually existed. You've got places, the places that we find in the Gospels, these are just some of them. We know that these places, they're not fictional places.
Christians, do you not think I could open up the Book of Mormon and come up with places that are actually real? Christians, do you not think I can open up the Quran, and come up with places that actually existed and are real?
So they actually existed. Procedures, a lot of things like the crucifixion and burial practices of crucified victims, whether they were left on crosses. We know that in Jerusalem, this was not the case. We know from archaeological data, we know from Josephus, that the Romans allowed the Jews to remove the crucified. Josephus mentions this specifically.
I just really wonder if there's people listening in that auditorium. By the way, you see right here, right behind this is where I used to play my saxophone, right about there. And my wife was on this side over here. Just fun facts here.
Prior to the destruction of Jerusalem, they allowed the Jews to remove the crucified and give them a proper burial prior to sunset. We've got confirmation of many items about Jesus from the Gospels that we do in historical Jesus research.
Like what? Confirmation? What do you mean by confirmation?
And number 6, only a very small percentage of the reported items have a reasonable chance of being errors. Okay. Now, hear me here. I'm not saying the Gospels have errors in it, but I'm saying in order to establish that they are historically reliable, they don't need to be inerrant. Historically reliable is a...
Why do you even need to say that? It's because he does want to lower the confidence of the Christians listening, but why can't you just... See, this is what my philosopher teacher asked me when I was a freshman in undergrad. He said, isn't it reasonable that some things in the Bible are true and that some things in the Bible are not true? That report as being true, but they're just wrong. Why can't you just flat out say, Michael Licona, that some things in the Gospel, some things in the New Testament are flat out wrong? They are in error. If we had a time machine, we could go back and say, no, this never happened. This is wrong. This is false reporting. Why can't you say that there's at least one case of that? And I'm talking beyond a spelling mistake. The reason why Christians like Licona can't say that is because once they start doubting at least one piece, one claim, then they have to have a criteria to look at all the other claims. Then they start doubting those claims, and then it becomes a house of cards for them. And this is why so many Christians now will just have this mere Christianity stance. Well, if Jesus Christ, if Jesus Christ rose from the dead, then Christianity is true. It's like they try to block out all the bits of all those claims that undergird the core proposition of Jesus rising from the dead in the first place. But once you start picking at those little claims one by one, and if some of those claims are wrong historically, it does become a house of cards. Like Licona knows this. This is why he uses the word gist, and why people like C.S. Lewis came up with mere Christianity.
Different kind of standard. So, and it's not with inerrant. So, like, for example, are the Psalms inerrant? Are they divinely inspired? Sure. But are they historically reliable?
Yeah, are the Psalms historically reliable? That's a great question. When it says that God knit me in the womb, this is a psalm, this is a song, this is a poem, and yet Christians use this to defend or to say that abortion is wrong. But is that historically true, that God knew you when you were in the womb? I could do this all day.
Not a trick question, But no, we wouldn't say they're historically reliable. We wouldn't say they're historically unreliable. It's an illegitimate question. It's the wrong genre. It's not a historical genre. It'd be like saying, does the color blue meet EPA regulations? You don't ask whether the Psalms or the Proverbs are historically reliable. You don't ask if parables are.
Actually, you could ask that question. Does the color blue meet EPA regulations? If it's like, maybe not the color blue, but a certain wavelength of light, of energy has to meet a certain regulation in order to be used in a machine or whatever for safety. And if it's not, then you have to wear this is why you wear lead when you take an x-ray, because at a certain wavelength, then you don't have to.
Are historically reliable. They're not historical genre. But you can have a historical literature like, say, Sallust's War with Catiline, and you can say, is this historically reliable? You can say, yes, but it's not divinely inspired. These are historically reliable, inerrant, inspired, are different questions. We're seeking to answer here, do they meet the minimal standards of being historically reliable? And one of the criteria is we don't want more than just a small percentage of things reported to be false. Now, when we come to the Gospels, there are a handful of candidates that they're reasonably good candidates for being errors. We can't establish that they are errors, and there are people who have tried to reconcile these and explain them, and those explanations may be correct, they may not be. We just don't have a way of verifying them. But some of them are really difficult, such as the death of Judas. Matthew said he hanged himself.
No, the death of Judas is not difficult to reconcile. I watched a video from Inspiring Philosophy, and he cleared that all up. Silly Licona.
The book of Acts says that he fell headlong and his guts burst open and died. Okay, well, these seem to be contradictory. Now someone said,
No, he was hung, and then the rope broke after several days, and then he hit a rock, and then he flipped forwards, did a somersault in the air, headlong down first, and then he hit another rock in the ab area, and then his guts burst open. Licona, you can reconcile these things. It's a perfect harmonization. If I had a time machine and went back, that's exactly what I've seen happen to Judas. Oh, man, I hate these liberal, progressive Christians.
Said, yeah, he hung himself, the rope broke or the branch broke, and he fell down and burst his guts open and intestines came out. Yeah, well, maybe. Seems ad hoc, seems like a stretch. Besides, if the rope or a branch broke.
If it's to reconcile the very word of God, then it's not ad hoc, Licona. Then it's true. Because if you don't reconcile it, then it's false. So you got to reconcile it to make it true. So there's no such thing as correct harmonizations being ad hoc, Licona.
Breaks. Do you fall headlong or do you fall on your butt?
Sarcasm.
Oh, well, he fell on his butt and then he tumbled. He was on like this steep hill. He fell on his butt and then he tumbled head first down. That's how he did it. I mean, it gets to be hermeneutical waterboarding until you get the text to tell you what you want to hear, right? And I'm not really.
See, this is what I love about Licona. He's being intellectually honest right now, which I do not see from many, many apologists. They just can't admit that, hey, no, this is. We got a tension here between two gospels that cannot be resolved without being incredibly silly and ad hoc.
For wanting to do that. So I'd say it's a reasonable candidate for an error. Doesn't mean that it is, but at least we have to admit it's a reasonable.
Why can't you have the gonads to say it's wrong? Like, you can give your opinion. Of course, you could be wrong with that opinion, but have the backbone and guts, Licona, just to say, I think these two gospels are in conflict, in tension, contradictory to each other, and one of them or both of them got it wrong. Why can't you just say that? And then watch the conservative evangelicals start to tremor. It's okay. They'll get over it. They'll cry in their rooms for 2 hours, but they'll get over it.
Reasonable candidate. The census of Caesar Augustus mentioned, that's another one. There's a handful of these. None of them impact any doctrine. These are all just minor details in the peripherals.
It's okay. This is where I disagree, and this is where I think a lot of Christians would agree with me, an atheist. It is these little details that when you add them up as the cumulative case that puts doubt in the big gist. You can't have a gist without these little details. Am I wrong? I don't think so.
Okay, but we only have like a handful of these in the Gospels. Very small percentage.
Yeah, very small. I wonder what the I wonder if someone was to sit down and any tension that reasonable people see, I wonder how many tensions are in the gospel accounts. What percentage of all the words? or what percentage of all the claims?
All right, so let's summarize. Historically reliable, we've defined this to say, at minimum, it provides us with an accurate gist. In other words, it gives us an essentially faithful representation.
An accurate gist, but since this was such an amazing event that was told over and over and over again, as Licona said, and that therefore the memories of these authors were very reliable, it provides an accurate gist.
Of what occurred, we can trust that the main and essential parts in the Gospels are true. They meet these 6 criteria. And these criteria are, we have reasons to believe the Gospel authors intended to report accurate history.
Because they said so, right?
We have reasons to believe that the Gospel authors chose their sources judicially.
But they didn't tell us who they were. Like Mark, for example, didn't say, hey, everybody, believe me, I got this from Peter.
We have reasons to believe that the Gospel authors used their sources responsibly.
But yet he just admitted that there's contradictions within the Gospels that cannot be resolved. Well, he sort of admitted that.
We have reasons to believe that the Gospel authors were capable of reporting accurate history.
Yeah, even though that the Gospels themselves say that they were illiterate, backwoods fishermen and so forth.
We have reasons to think that we can verify numerous items reported in the Gospels, and we also have reasons to think, number 6.
Yeah, including real people, real places, just like the Quran can do and just like the Book of Mormon can do.
That no more than a very small percentage of the things reported in the Gospels may be false.
Okay, this gets back to the general topic, the reliability of the Gospels. How small is that percentage, Licona? 1%? 1% of the Gospels might be false? 2%? 5? 10? If the Gospels were 30% false, Licona, would you leave Christianity? Where's that cutoff for you? These are the type of questions you need to ask people like Licona.
And so therefore, the Gospels, as we're defining it here.
And I guess I could jump in my car right now, drive 45 minutes to this church on Speedway, get out of my car, he's there right now, and knock on the door and ask him these questions.
They meet at least the minimal standard of being historically reliable. They could be far more than that, but they meet our standard, and thus we can say the Gospels are historically reliable. You want more information? We've got our YouTube channel. Just go type in at YouTube Mike Licona, Licona. We've got over 200 videos there. A lot of things.
Yeah, Christians listening, type in Licona on YouTube and the Gospel of Mark, and I bet you my video will come up before his.
Things that you can learn. We've got just a series we completed, 5 videos on the formation of the biblical canon. We've got stuff from Dan Wallace on manuscript evidence, the best English translations. We got stuff on the Gospel of Mark, which is some great stuff. Or you can go to my website.
Yeah, see, this is what I need. This is the real value of Licona. He can teach guys like me how to market. I'm terrible at marketing. It's like I need these fancy things, and instead of risenjesus.com, maybe like PineCreek.com.
risenjesus.com, and I'm finishing 10 minutes early. So I tried to finish on time, but I finished a little early, talked a little faster today because I didn't want to run out of time. Would it be possible for me to take some Q&A?
Yes.
Would that be okay?
Do it.
All right, thumbs up. Anybody got any questions, comments, snide remarks? Yes, sir. What is the earliest date for the writing of Matthew, Mark, and Luke? Well, the earliest, most scholars put Mark first, okay? And I think there's good reasons for that. And then you got Matthew and Luke. Well, if you're looking at the earliest datings, some of the...
Okay, I'm going to guess. Isn't it 40, 42? Oh, no. Actually, I think some historians, don't they say like even in the 30s?
Arguments would be, well, Acts finishes with Paul still alive. He's in prison. I think it's Festus has just taken over, and I believe he took over in the early 60s as the Roman governor of Judea, the prefect of Judea.
By the way, as an atheist listening to this Christian ask that question, what does it matter when the Gospels were written? Because we have Paul, who wrote the Creed, 1 Corinthians 15, which goes all the way back to years, maybe 2 or 3 years after the events happened. Like, you can't beat that, right? That means it must be true when it's recorded so soon.
And So that would be the early 60s that they argue that Acts ends with Paul in prison there. Luke would have had to have been written, and you don't have the fall of Jerusalem recorded, so it's still before 70, probably there mid-60s or a little bit before.
Yeah, see, good point. Aurl, A-U-R-L. If I was there right now, which I could have been, I could have been one of those guys asking questions, but I probably only would have gotten one question in.
Luke would have had to have been written before that because that's the prequel to the book of Acts. And since Luke is using Mark, then Mark would have been still earlier. So there have been a couple of scholars, not too many, but a few of them who place Mark even as early as the 40s that they argue for that. But most scholars don't take it that way. I just had a student, I teach at Houston Baptist University, and one of my students, he just did a master's thesis that I supervised, and he surveyed all what critical scholars writing in English since 1965 are saying about the dating of Mark. He had over 200 sources by critical scholars, more than 200 critical scholars, and the majority think that Mark was written somewhere between 50 and 70 AD, with a majority of them placing it sometime between 65 and 70 AD. So that would place the Gospels a little bit later than the earliest dating of it, but the majority place Mark between 50 and 70, Matthew a little after that, Luke a little after that, and John around the year 95. Okay, but almost all scholars place the Gospels in the first century.
From my perspective, the dating in the Gospels is irrelevant because of my epistemology. I realize it's relevant for Christians who value the historical method, but for me, if all four Gospels were written within 1 year, even 1 month of the reported events, that doesn't raise the probabilities for me that it actually happened. But for Christians, they need to date them early for one basic reason, that these authors had to be alive. It can't be too late, otherwise they'd be dead.
We can't know. I mean, we can only have arguments for these things, but we really can't know for sure. We just know they're first century. Yes, sir?
John is written so differently than the others. Were there any other ancient biographers that did any?
Look how empty. I know it's because of COVID, but look how empty that church is. And look at the average age of those people. From my vantage point, it looks like most of these are very old or older people.
Kind of biography similar to John, and since his is so unique, does that even add more strength to the argument that the Gospels are?
Okay, good question. So the Gospel of John, as you've recognized, and most scholars have, the Gospel of John is quite different than Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And Matthew, Mark, and Luke are very similar. They're almost word for word on many occasions. They're referred to as the synoptic Gospels, from two Greek words, sun, meaning with, and opsis, meaning see or view. So you can view these together. They're so similar. John, on the other hand, is very different. In fact, the conservative New Testament scholar N.T. Wright has said, I love this statement. He says, John reminds me of my wife. I feel about John as I feel about my wife. I love her very much, but I don't claim to understand her. John is very different. In fact, the conservative New Testament scholar F.F. Bruce said that what John has done is he's taking the traditions about Jesus. Remember, he's writing after, maybe a few decades after Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And he says he's taking the traditions about Jesus and he's rewritten them so we have an expanded paraphrase, a translation of the freest kind, and a transposition into another key.
This is damning, what he just said. He's rewriting, he's rephrasing. It's the divinity of Jesus is most clearly shown in the Gospel of John. Now, I know Christians can use Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and even Paul, but it's the clearest in the Gospel of John. Christians will admit this. Before Abraham, I am. This is in the Gospel of John. But yet it is the latest Gospel. And if you listen, I don't want to play it back, but if you listen to Licona here, it's the one that takes the most liberties. I think I even have heard Licona use that phrase. And even guys like Craig Keener.
And much more. That's F.F. Bruce saying this. Even Craig Keener has said in his commentary on John that all...
So you don't need to go see Licona in person. I can tell you what Licona thinks.
All Johannine scholars, those who specialize in the Gospel of John, acknowledge some degree of Johannine adaptation. John has taken Jesus' words and recast them in his own words and expanded them to give us like a theological paraphrase.
Some people would call that hyperbolizing.
Have other authors done that? I suppose that they have, but John probably does it more than the typical biographer does. But why did he do that? We don't know. It could be that he looked and he probably knew about Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and he sees that they're pretty much reporting the same thing. Why does he need to just do another thing? So he says, okay, I've got these others.
You would think Matthew would have said the exact same thing. Why do I need to repeat what Mark said?
We've got these. Let's do something a little bit differently. There are some things that people don't understand what Jesus said. So let me kind of take his words, almost like what we have in a paraphrase today. Let's take these words, and I'm going to elaborate some to bring out the theological meanings of these teachings.
Yeah, I'm going to elaborate some. I'm going to hyperbolize some. I'm going to fictionalize some. I'm going to make up characters up. There's a lot of people who think that the character Lazarus never existed. I think Richard Carrier says this. And he makes a great case. Lazarus in the Gospel of John, Lazarus in the Gospel of Luke. One is about people rising from the dead won't convince people about that Jesus is the Christ. But in the Gospel of John, someone rising from the dead did convince people that Jesus is the Christ. They're in friction with each other. Even that parable in Luke with Lazarus and with the story of Lazarus coming back from the dead, they're almost in direct opposition to each other. And they're both named Lazarus.
Jesus. John takes some more liberties than the average biographer does in the way he...
Yes, Camille. Licona just admitted that John knew the synoptics because he said, why would John write, the author of John, write what the synoptics already said? That only makes sense if he was familiar with the synoptics. So we have a New Testament historian admitting that the Gospel of John is not independent from the Gospels, Mark, Matthew, and Luke.
Reports things. Here's another thing. Most of what even though the synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke report a lot of the same stuff, they're focusing on Jesus' ministry in Galilee. Yeah, they've got some in Jerusalem, but most of what they're reporting about Jesus is in Galilee, whereas John is focused on events that took place in Jerusalem. So that's some of the main differences between John and the synoptic Gospels. Great question. Yes, sir.
To rely upon a Q document to write the Gospel of Matthew?
Oh, okay, good question. Why would Matthew have to use the Q source, the hypothetical Q source, to write it if he's an eyewitness? Well, in my view, I think Matthew is the author of Q. I don't know that for sure, but I think that Q, see, here's the Q. When you look at Q, it's almost exclusively, all but 3 minor exceptions, all of it involves teaching, sayings of Jesus. It's not narrative form. It's almost all exclusively teachings of Jesus. So it could very well be the case that what Matthew did was these are notes that Matthew took while Jesus was alive about Jesus' teachings so he could take it along with him. He would have been literate as a tax collector. He's taking down Jesus' teachings and he's writing them in Aramaic, which would have been his main language. And
whoa, he's saying, okay, this is gorgeous. This is scrumptious. He's saying that Q is actually Matthew's notes taken while Jesus was alive? Now, of course, he would admit that he can't show that this is true. But wouldn't it be great if that was preserved, the originals, those notes? Because that's exactly what I was talking about earlier. Wouldn't it be great if we had contemporary evidence for Jesus while he was alive?
These are the teachings of Jesus. Later on, after Mark writes his gospel, they're after Matthew. You're an eyewitness. Hey, tell us about Jesus. So he has a secretary. Secretaries were used widely in antiquity. Cicero, the great Roman rhetorician and lawyer and orator, he had a secretary named Tiro. In fact, he writes to Tiro once when Tiro was away, and he says, Tiro, I just had Pompey, the great Roman general Pompey, over, and he asked me to read something I'd recently written, and I declined because I said Tiro had not had a chance to improve it. So you have Cicero has a secretary who does a whole lot more than take dictation. He does a lot of serious editing. When you come to Paul, in at least 3 of his letters, he says, I, Paul, who write this greeting with my own hand, which means he didn't write the rest. You say, well, wait a minute. He could have dictated that letter, okay? Well, my friend Randy Richards, who teaches...
Yeah, Camille makes a good point in the live stream chat. So far in this, Licona has admitted that the Gospel of John is not independent from the Synoptics, and that Q is not independent from the Synoptics. He's shooting himself in the foot here by talking about this because he's shrinking down the number of independent sources for Jesus from possibly Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Paul, to now, well, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John really should be considered one source. And then Paul would be another source. Now we're down to 2. And Q you can't count as a separate source because we don't have it, number 1. And number 2, These are Matthew's notes, which is not independent from the Gospel of Matthew. So are we down to two sources? And Paul mentions almost nothing about the ministry and life of Jesus. He had bigger fish to fry. So if we're talking about how many sources do we have for the life and ministry of Jesus, we're down to one. And in history, when you only have one source for something, especially for amazing big claims, I won't say extraordinary because that gets people triggered, we don't accept that. So we're done here. How was that, Camille? Was that a good summary?
At Palm Beach Atlantic University. He teaches on this. He's an expert on this kind of stuff, on secretaries. And he says, let's look at what you got here. He says this, I do this with my students. I take a piece of papyrus, I give it to all my students. And then what I do is I give them some ink and a reed, and I say, okay, I want you to take down, and I'm going to dictate to you what I want you to write. Ready? Paul, an apostle. 1 minute later, of Jesus Christ. 1 minute later, by the will of God. Can you imagine doing a whole letter that way? No, they took notes, they composed the letter, they let Paul read it, Paul makes some adjustments.
If it took that long to write a letter, like 1 minute later, don't you lose your train of thought? Aren't you more likely to make mistakes if you can't actually give a thought and say, okay, write this down? It's like, okay, where was I? If you're pausing a minute each time.
And he says, all right, write the final, I sign my name to it. Now, if Paul, who's highly educated, and Cicero, highly educated, are going to do this with letters, don't you think the gospel authors who are uneducated fishermen and so forth are going to do this with a more extensive biography? That biographer is going to take...
They were uneducated fishermen, but earlier before you said that they were capable of writing reliable history.
Take notes and then construct that. The gospel author then is going to read it, make other suggestions and so forth. Matthew probably tells his secretary.
Someone in the live stream chat says, well, PineCreek, I guess you proved that the Holy Bible is false. Guess it's time to tell us what is truth. Yes, you are on the road to changing religions. I will, David, I will have an altar call at the end of this live stream where you can give your life to PineCreek, and I will reveal the real truth then. But I'm glad that the scales are coming off your eyes.
You can use Mark as your primary source. Let's supplement it. Here's my Q source, the sayings of Jesus. You can use these, translate them into Greek, and here's some more eyewitness testimony from me you can use. Does that make sense? Great. God bless you guys. Thanks for having me.
Okay, I believe Greg Koukl's next, and he's going to be talking about tactics. Oh, now this is going to be even more fun in my opinion. But I have to... Let's see here. I have to use the latrine. So what I'm going to do is play one of my favorite songs that's 4 minutes long. If you don't like it, you can mute it, but I'll be back in under 4 minutes. And we'll see you then.
Say the price of my love's not a price that you're willing to pay. Why so sad? Remember we made an arrangement when you went away. Now you're making me mad. Remember, despite our estrangement, I'm your man. You'll be back. Soon you'll see, you'll remember you belong to me. You'll be back, time will tell. You'll remember that I served you well. Oceans rise, empires fall. We have seen each other through it all. And when push comes to shove, I will send a fully armed battalion to remind you of my love. Da 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 da. You say our love is draining and you can't go on. You'll be the one complaining when I am gone. subject. 'Cause you're my favorite subject. My sweet, submissive subject. My loyal, royal subject. Forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. You'll be back like before. I will fight the fight and win the war. For your love, for your praise. And I'll love you till my dying days. When you're gone, I'll go mad. So don't throw away this thing we have. 'Cause when push comes to shove, I will kill your friends and family to remind you of my love. Da 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 da. Everybody.
Let's give him another thank you from Tucson, Arizona, Dr. Mike Licona. Okay, we're going to take a quick 10-minute break here. We do not have any filler video, but we primarily addressing here. If anybody has a copy of that, you can bring it up here right now so you can use it as a prop.
Okay, so let's see. Let's double check. So this is in Tucson where I live. I used to lead worship in the very stage that they're talking on. We just heard from Mike Licona. So yeah, Tactical Faith with Greg Koukl. This should be rich. And tomorrow is going to be J. Warner Wallace in the evening. Do I go to that? Frank Turek. The thing is, it's just, I can get so much more accomplished by critiquing them online. Okay, here it comes.
Thank you, Anders. Thank you. Well, I want you to know that I am pleased and honored and deeply satisfied to be the third speaker this morning and not the first one. Because I am not a morning...
Oh, something. He had a boo-boo.
Said to me, Mr. Koukl, you must have a great quiet time in the morning. And I said, frankly, ma'am, before my first cup of coffee, I'm an atheist. So my wife and I stopped over at Starbucks on the way over here, and I got my coffee, but it's still getting into my...
Yes, Doug Dean, good to see you here again. Everything came out just fine in the latrine.
My bloodstream. So right now, I'm a Jehovah's Witness. So working on that. By the way, you might be wondering what this is and what happened. I'll tell you what happened.
I tell you what happened. Greg Koukl, he was here in Tucson, and I went to visit him last night, and he said, okay, Doug, I know you did videos with me, on me, and critiquing me, but let's settle this once and for all. I'm left-handed, you're left-handed. Let's arm wrestle. And that's what happened. I broke his arm.
Wife doesn't have a good sense of humor. No, actually, that's not true. She's sitting over there. So this is a little rotator cuff operation I had 3 weeks ago, and so I got to be straitjacketed with this for a little while. I love conferences like this, and I think they do...
Because you make money.
A lot of good, but there's a problem with conferences like this, and some of you are feeling it already, because when you get to this point of the conference, you start feeling kind of like that guy in the Far Side cartoon, right? And he's in the classroom, and there's all these equations on the board, and he raises his hand, and he said, Professor, could I please be excused? My brain is full. Start feeling that way, right? You get kind of overwhelmed with all the good information, and it's been absolutely fabulous. And I just heard that all of these are going to be up online somewhere, so you can go back and review them. You talk to leadership about that, but...
You know what's funny is that when people go to YouTube and search this conference, if I tag it properly... This video I'm making right now might come up before theirs.
That's great, because we want to show some of these to our daughters. I have a 12-year-old, I have a 15-year-old, and I have a 12-year-old. And I know what you're thinking. That's weird, because that guy's an old guy. So how old is he? I can't remember. But I'm in my 6th Medicare year. That's how I keep track nowadays, okay? And, well, how did he get kids that young? I can't remember that either. But it keeps me hopping. I don't know who thought of the thing like kids keep you young.
He can't remember how he had kids. But he's not implying he was intoxicated when he had coitus.
I don't know who made that up, but they're lying. All right? They didn't have any kids, if that's the deal. The thing that is problematic sometimes about conferences like this when you get all the information is you're thinking, well, this is really good stuff, and this helps to encourage me, and I want to be able to get this into play in conversations, but how do I do that? And so there's a missing bridge, and that missing bridge is a bridge from the content to the conversation, or we'll call it from the scholarship to the relationship. And that's what I'd like to provide for you now, something very, very practical. But I want to start out by saying a couple of things that at first you're going to think are really crazy and are actually controversial, because I've had colleagues of mine that disagree with me on this. But I'll tell you, here's the first thing. I never have it as a goal. When I'm in a conversation with someone who I hope will lead to spiritual things, and maybe I can have a spiritual impact on that person, I never have it as a goal to lead that person to Christ.
You know why? Because he leans Calvinist. That's God's job.
In fact, I don't even have it as a goal in a particular conversation to even get to the gospel. Now, do I want that person to come to Christ? Of course I do. Do you need the gospel for that? Of course you do. Why
do you want to lead people to Christ? These are great questions to ask a Christian. Why exactly do you want people to become Christians? There's only 2 right answers. I'll tell you. A spoiler alert. Is to avoid hell, get to heaven, number 1. Number 2, to have life on the full here on earth. But it seems like Christians are always struggling, so it's shaky on number 2.
It's the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes. But I want you to think a little bit about our way of engaging people now. And something that we inherited, I think, largely from the Jesus movement or before, and I became a Christian during the Jesus movement. And our process of evangelism and going out and sharing the simple gospel and inviting people to receive Christ. So it's a closing technique, so to speak. We're trying to get people to sign on the dotted line. Nothing wrong with that. But the times have changed in the last 50 years from the Jesus movement. The culture is extremely different. And so we need to not change the message, but be sensitive to changing the method that we engage people with. And the way the culture has changed is there's a lot more objections that are coming up. Now, we got the smart guys who've stepped up and answered the objections. We got the goods. And there isn't a challenge to Christianity that hasn't been met solidly by solid people who have done the background work and the academics and that kind of stuff.
There's not an objective objection to Mormonism that hasn't been backed up by Mormon historians, Mormon apologists, that doesn't provide answers to these objections. You can say the same thing of Islam.
We got the goods, okay? But most people don't know about that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you're wrong about that, Greg Koukl. Most people who have left Christianity, no, I shouldn't say most, a lot of former Christians, we know the goods you got, and we said, you know what? Not good enough. This is the mistake apologists make. They think that people don't know the answers to these objections. No, they know the answers to these objections, and they didn't find those answers as sufficient to squash this problem. And the biggest problem is the insufficiency of the evidence to match the claim. That's number 1. That's the biggest one. What's the strongest evidence against Christianity? Insufficient evidence. Done.
They hear about the new atheists and people who go on TV and write books that are bestsellers on the New York Times bestseller list. And they think the smart guys have weighed in against us and found us wanting. All right? And so they're not even interested.
Notice how he said smart guys? I'm going to psychologize Greg Koukl here. And I think he's used the word smart guys a few times. This is important to him. I do not want to look stupid. I got smart guys like Licona saying you don't have to be stupid for believing this stuff. And the other presenters before him. It's like, no, don't dismiss us for being stupid, because we're not. We're not stupid. Honest. Believe me.
In hearing anything about Christ. And there are other problems in culture that make people hostile to Christianity. So it's very hard to break through that. You come in with a simple gospel presentation, they're not even listening. Plus,
well, that's because they already know it. This is another dirty secret that a lot of people who weren't raised in Christianity know, that when it comes to evangelism, and I dare Greg Koukl to disagree with me on this one, it's not so much presenting the gospel message. It's trying to convince people that they're not already Christian. Can I get an amen, Christians? You know exactly what I'm talking about. It's like you want to witness to your friend at work or your friend at school, but they think they're already Christians. So the first step in a lot of Christian evangelism, evangelical type evangelism, is to convince people that, number one, they're not Christian or the wrong type of Christian. And then number two, teach them about the true type of Christianity.
Told you I was going to give you
I know these guys like the back of my hand.
a game plan that would allow you to engage and get to that point of helping people make a decision. You'd take notes and you'd say, praise the Lord and hallelujah, and then you wouldn't do it. And the reason you wouldn't do it is, especially in the context of our culture, that sounds like fighting words. That's dangerous stuff nowadays.
By the way, I appreciate Greg Koukl. You know, Mike Licona had a slideshow and everything, and used that as an outline. He's just up there riffing. Now, I'm sure he's done this many times before, but I appreciate that.
And so instead of engaging, you sit on the bench and you don't get into play. And I want to address that issue before I give you the material I have that will help you to maneuver, engage, be that bridge for the content of the conversation. I want to invite you to think in a different way about the whole process of what we call evangelism. I don't even use that language anymore. I talk about being an ambassador because I'm trying to encourage not confrontation, which is what we often associate with evangelism, and so do the outsiders, but I want people to be thinking in terms of a genial diplomacy. That's being an ambassador. So now I'm going to tell you my second controversial thing. First one, I don't have it as a goal in any individual conversation to get to the end game and to get people to sign on the dotted line. Here's the second thing. I have not prayed with someone to receive Christ in more than 30 years. What a loser!
Yeah, this is part of the reason why I didn't go. Like, this is happening 45 minutes away from where I live right now. But this is one of the reasons why I didn't go. Because I know what he's going to say before he even says it. And I'm an atheist. He's going to, I could be wrong, but he's going to say that that he is the guy who prepares the people who actually go out and do the evangelism. He is he's the gardener. He provides the fertilizer and the water and the soil for the troops, the Christian troops, to go out and do the evangelizing and praying for people. So that's not his job. It's you minions, Christian minions' job to go out there and do the real work and rely on the Holy Spirit to give you the correct words to help lead someone to Christ, which really it's Christ who leads people to Christ.
But I will tell you this. I have never been more effective for the gospel's sake than I have in the last 30 years.
Whoa! I don't want to do this now, but I could bring up a chart. Greg Koukl, and my guess is people like him, might say, never been more effective than the last 30 years. Okay, what's the graph of Christianity in the U.S.? A negative slope? Downwards? If Christianity losing its influence, losing its steam in the United States is representative of you being the most effective that you've been in the last 30 years, ooh, I think you should take a pay cut. But my guess is you're the boss of your own organization. But I guess among the non-Christians who listen to Greg Koukl alone, the slope is positive, right? Is that what you're saying? The Christians who listen to you who then go out and evangelize, then you have a positive slope. But all the other apologists, no. Christianity has been tanking as apologetics has been ramping.
Okay, so I am going to give you an aphorism. It's a statement, a kind of a clever little saying. Jesus taught in aphorisms, not in three-point sermons. You know, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. There's an aphorism. Who is great in the kingdom will be the least in the kingdom. They're kind of catchy, memorable phrases. So I'm going to give you one like that is very profound, though it sounds so obvious as to be unnecessary to even mention.
Profound, but not necessary to mention.
But it is a huge insight. So I want you to write this down. Here it is. Before there can be any harvest.
Oh, see?
Before there can be any harvest, there always has to be a season of, let's just call it gardening, okay?
See?
Before there can be any harvest.
You don't need to go see Greg Koukl. Just talk to me and say, hey, what does Greg Koukl think? And I can tell you.
Hey, there has to be a season of gardening. No duh. Who doesn't know that? It's certainly true in agrarian situations, but it's also true in evangelism. Point being, nobody, virtually nobody, especially nowadays, hears the gospel for the first time and says, all right, man, I'm in. Where do I sign up? I want to walk with Jesus the rest of my life and face the onslaught of the culture.
True, true. Nobody just looks at that and says, yes, the gospel is foolishness to those who are perishing. And I would even go further than what Greg Koukl is saying. That you can sit down and study all the historical, the transcripts, the prophecies, all that stuff, and still not be convinced. Why is that? Well, the Christian would say it's a heart problem. Whereas I would say it's a psychological, emotional, it's where you are in life, your needs. Number one step, besides convincing people that are not already Christian, number one step to converting someone to Christianity who hasn't been raised in it, have something bad happen in their life so they have this existential crisis and need for it. Why does anyone need Christianity? Because of the afterlife, yes? Life on earth is here just a vapor. You need to convince people that heaven and hell exist first. Especially hell. The belief in hell is way more important than the belief in Jesus. Because without hell, you don't need Jesus. If everybody just goes to heaven, you don't need Jesus. I mean, you don't need to believe in him and follow him and worship him and all that jazz.
No, that's a big decision. That's a major change. People don't make big decisions like that, especially decisions that cost them. And by the way,
yeah, and they don't leave Christianity for the same reasons, because it costs them family relationships and so forth, community.
If you're not in some way communicating the cost of following Jesus, particularly in this culture, to people who are thinking about it, then you're not giving them the whole story. I remember during the Jesus movement, we'd say, hey, become a Christian. Jesus will make your life great, and you'll feel great, and you'll be really happy, and he'll kick your kids off drugs, and he'll fix your marriage. And we tell them all these things that Jesus never promised to do.
Yes. You see? If you're saying you need to become a Christian because it will make your life better, it will help you get off drugs, it will help you become a better father or mother or whatever, Jesus never said that. In fact, your life might get worse. You might become persecuted for Christ's sake. You might even die because you became a Christian in some countries. Jesus didn't promise you a great life, humanistically speaking, if you become a Christian. No. Let's get down to what this is really about.
When you become a Christian, Jesus turns your life upside down. Well, actually, he turns it right side up, but it feels like upside down. So it's challenging. And for me, 47 years now, and it's still challenging. Okay? When we talk with people about Christ, when people come to Christ, it's because there has been a period of time where they have been thinking about this new way of looking at reality, and slowly, by the power of the Spirit, are persuaded by it until there's a time when they're ready, when they get harvested. And I'll tell you a secret about the harvest. I became a Christian in September 28, 1973, and it was my brother Mark who did most of the gardening in my life.
His brother Mark led him to Christ?
And that night, Friday night, in my apartment in West LA, he came to...
I don't think I've ever heard Greg Koukl's testimony. So this is new to me. This is good.
...visit me, and he started telling me about Jesus again. And I told him, Mark, you don't need to tell me anymore about Jesus. I've already decided to become a Christian. Now, it took me about 15 minutes to peel him off the ceiling. And then I prayed my...
Okay, what year did he say this was? 1973? Is that what he said? Can someone in the live stream chat see what year Greg Koukl was born? And I bet you anything that Greg Koukl, well, didn't he say he gave his age earlier? 64, did he say? 73? Yeah, he probably became a Christian between the ages of 18 and 22, like I've always said. That's the probable age.
Sinner's Prayer, my version of it. But I want you to see something. Notice when the fruit is ripe and it's ready for harvest, it drops right into the bucket. All you got to do is bump it. The harvest is easy when the fruit is ripe. The hard work is not in the harvesting. And look,
this is a marketing speech he's giving. The hard work's not in the harvesting. The hard work is not actually going out and talking to non-Christians and telling them the gospel. The hard work is preparing yourself and knowing why you believe in all this sort of thing. Just the thing that great Koukl does. Well, wouldn't you know it?
Unless you're trying to harvest unripe fruit. The hard work is in the gardening. And as I look back at my own life, and the books I write and the universities that I speak at, 80 plus now, or 30 years in radio, I realize
self-promotion.
That really I'm a gardener. I'm not a harvester, okay? But I want to tell you something. By the way, and I think that most Christians are gardeners as well. But they are pressed into a harvest mode with the way that we have been instructed on evangelism, and so
I don't care. I want a harvester. I'll take a gardener. Great Koukl, you're invited to come on my show.
Gets frustrating and scary, and that's why we head for the bench. Now, remember a few moments ago I said I haven't really prayed with anybody to receive Christ in over 30 years. But I've been more effective than ever. How does that happen? Some of you might have heard of a guy named...
How does he define more effective than ever? Is he basically saying that he's making more money now than ever? No, he can't be saying that. Doug, you're being too hypercritical here. How does he gauge that he's been more effective than ever if Christianity is failing?
J. Warner Wallace, does this name sound familiar? He'll be on this stage tomorrow. Jim Wallace was a very well-known cold case detective who never lost a case that went to trial. This guy solves murders that were cold, stone dead for 30 years.
And if it wasn't for his wife, he'd never become a Christian. End quote from J. Warner Wallace.
And he's had 4 different of his cases that were on, Nightline or whatever that is, where they follow because they're so fascinating, interesting, how he's able to put this together. Jim was an atheist, a hardcore atheist.
I was a Christian, a hardcore Christian.
And then he decided to take his prodigious detective skills and apply them to the testimony of the witnesses of the New Testament to see if they were reliable. And he became persuaded that they were true and reliable. He became a Christian, and now he's a phenomenal Christian defender of the faith, and you'll see him tomorrow. Don't miss J. Warner Wallace. He wrote a book called Cold Case Christianity. It's a bestseller. Then he wrote a book called God's Crime Scene, bestseller. You can see he's working all his cop stuff in, and he'll do that tomorrow. It's a riot. It's a lot of fun, okay? Don't miss it.
Yeah, I'll probably live stream that tomorrow. I don't think I'll go there.
Warner Wallace was listening to my radio show when he was an atheist.
Oh, I never knew that. It wasn't because of his wife. It was because he listened. The reason why J. Warner Wallace became one of the reasons he became a Christian is because he listened to this guy. My goodness. If a guy, an atheist, a skeptic like J. Warner Wallace could become a Christian by listening to Great Koukl, man, we need to get more people listening to Great Koukl.
Jim was in my garden. Did I harvest him? No, I didn't harvest him. Somebody else came into my garden.
My garden.
And harvested my crop.
And you too can be in my garden for the low, low price of $49.99 a month or whatever.
You might have heard of a guy named Abdu Murray. Abdu Murray was a former Muslim.
I know him.
He was an attorney in Detroit who became a follower of Jesus. Then he became an apologist for Christianity. Then he started his own organization. And then he joined RZIM, Ravi Zacharias International Ministry, and now he's the senior vice president of RZIM.
Look how successful people become when they enter Great Koukl's garden. Man, it would be dangerous if I was sitting there right now, 45 minutes away in my old church. By the way, I was right behind this stand here. That's where I used to play saxophone. Actually, right behind him. Yes. If you come into Great Koukl's garden, you can be as successful as Abdu Murray.
International.
Abdu
Murray was in my garden. He was listening to our radio show before he became a Christian. I just want you to see the power of gardening. And Jesus talks about...
And the power of my garden.
about this, by the way, in John chapter 4. That's the woman on the well, right? Everybody preaches on his conversation with the woman on the well, but something happens afterwards. She goes off to Sychar. The disciples come to Jesus. They're bringing some food for him.
I told you this would be more exciting than Mike Licona.
And that's when he says, I have food you know not of. And then he tells the disciples, he says, you are about, watch this, you are about to reap where you did not sow. In other words, somebody else did the heavy lifting, and you're about to get the easy pickings, bump that fruit, goes into the basket, okay? And notice in Jesus' comment, he is identifying one field, in that case, Sychar, but two seasons, a season of sowing, gardening, a season of reaping, harvesting, and two kinds of workers, those who sow and those who reap, those who garden and those who harvest. And he also, with regards to like people going into my garden, getting Abdu and getting Jay Warner, it's okay with me. Why?
I guess I need to make a short clip after this about Koukl and the amount of times he says my garden.
Because as Jesus says, the one who sows and the one who reaps can rejoice together. We are all on the same team, but we have different jobs. Now, my conviction is, and this is based on observation too, but think about it, since the harvest is easier when the fruit is ripe, the hard work is in the gardening. You know this if you're a gardener, all summer long. Well, be all year long here, wouldn't it? Do things grow in this country? Yeah, they do. Well, cactus. You don't eat cactus, I don't think. You spend all summer long tilling and hoeing and weeding and watering and tending, and then the harvest comes. The hard work is in the gardening.
By the way, I see that Mike Licona just called me. Wants to do coffee. No time for you, Mike.
That's why we probably need more gardeners than we need harvesters. That's my conviction. And therefore, probably most of you are not harvest types like me. I mean, you're like me and not harvest types, but you're rather like me and you're gardening types. And by the way, if at this moment you are breathing a kind of a sigh of relief, wow, I never thought of it that way. Oh, that's good. That takes a lot of pressure off for me. You're probably a gardener. And if you're mad at me, and there are people get really hopping mad about what I just said, you're probably a harvester. And the people in my colleagues that don't like this, they're harvesters, I guarantee you. And I've gotten a tongue lashing from them. But I'm standing behind it because of Jesus' comments in John 4. Make it really clear, some sow and some reap. That's what he said. And plus, I've seen the impact in my own life and in the life of other Christians who get this idea. And so consequently now, since I'm not in harvest mode ever, I'm in gardening mode, I have a different goal.
Okay, now, it seems to me Greg Koukl is just... I said it's nice that he's just kind of riffing in the beginning, but now he's just getting repetitive.
In my conversations with people. And I communicate that goal whenever I'm talking to a secular audience. So I'm on a university campus, and I'm giving an address, some kind of talk about something, and here's the way I virtually always start out.
I thought he was going to get into the Koukl method. Maybe that's coming up now.
I say, I'm here tonight because my life has been changed, deeply changed by an ancient teacher. His name is Jesus of Nazareth.
Yeah. Muslims, are you listening to that? His life was changed, radically changed, because of an ancient person named Jesus Christ. There's many Muslims' lives have been radically changed because of the teachings of Muhammad. There's many people whose lives have been radically changed because of the teachings from the Book of Mormon. Let me, Christians, I don't know how loud I can say this, but your changed life means nothing or very little to the veracity, the truth of what you attribute it to. Hey, thank you for the donation. Favorite worst nightmare? Some invest in PineCreek's garden. I better support the gardeners since I might come in and harvest a little someday. Get out of the harvest mode. Yes. People need to come into my garden, not Greg Koukl's garden.
And 47 years ago, when I was a student at UCLA, I began to think more carefully about the claims Jesus made about himself, about the claims he made about the world, and about the claim he made of my own life.
Jesus didn't make any claims about himself that you know of. It's authors of the New Testament who says that Jesus made claims about himself. Let's be very specific here.
And as I thought about it, and asked a lot of questions and pushed back hard and left the table and came back to the table and asked more questions. By the way, what's that? That's the gardening phase, right? I finally came to the conclusion, I tell the audience, that Jesus got it right. That he saw the world the way it really was, that the smart money was on him, and so...
and yet, it seems like there's very few, or none that I've really seen, that have started out non-Christian, looked at the historical evidence for Jesus, and became Christians because of that historical evidence. Like, especially historians. In fact, I should say historians. People who understand the historical method. Professional historians. Non-Christians. They don't become Christians because of the historical method. Something deeper. It's the regeneration from the Holy Spirit.
And the smartest thing I could do is then tuck in behind him and then follow Jesus. And then I tell the audience, but I am not here tonight to convert you. Collective sigh of relief, right? I have a more modest goal, I tell them. Here's what I say. I say, I just want to put a stone in your shoe. How about that?
Oh, me and Greg Koukl are alike in that sense. I'm not here to deconvert any Christians. I'm merely here to put a stone, a pebble, in the shoe of Christians.
I just want to annoy you a little bit.
I just want to annoy you Christians a little bit.
But in a good way.
In a good way.
I want you walking out of the auditorium kind of hobbling along because there's something that I said that's sticking in you, that got you thinking about Jesus. And if that's all I do tonight, I'm happy because I think Jesus of Nazareth is worth thinking about.
So if any Christian says what I'm doing is wrong, then they have to say what Greg Koukl is doing is wrong. Because I'm just here to annoy Christians a little bit, put a pebble in their shoe, so they finish my live streams, they limping away, feeling a little uneasy about what they believe because what PineCreek said.
So there's my introduction, and then I go right into my material. I'm letting them know exactly what I'm trying to do. I'm gardening.
Yeah, and I let Christians know up front what I'm trying to do. I'm gardening for Satan. My goal is to lead every Christian to hell.
That's all I'm after. I want to get them thinking. And so now when I'm talking one-on-one with somebody, same goal. I'm not going to try to win that person to Christ in that moment. I'm going to try to just do a little gardening. I'm going to give them something to think about. And part of my conviction...
By the way, what I just said, a lot of Christians are now scared who are watching and they left. It's like, if I listen to PineCreek's live stream, that would be like a gateway, an entry point for the demons to come in and influence my life. And I don't... Christians think this way. It's really scary.
It's not on me. It's on God. And I have a whole team of...
So if it's not on Greg Koukl, if it's not on his team, if it's all on God, why am I a non-Christian today? God. This is where his Calvinism starts to shine through a little bit.
Fellow gardeners that are there to add to the process. So when I garden a little bit in one person's life, they move out, they never see me again, but God sees them and then brings another gardener in. And then there's more gardening, more gardening. Finally, the fruit is ripe, it's ready to go, and by the grace of God, there's a harvest in that individual's life. And I have a feeling that you could think about your own life if you became a follower of Jesus as a young adult or as an adult. I bet you could look back and say, gosh, that's the way it happened in my own life. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, does this guy ever get to the gospel? How do you get to the gospel? And when do you get to the gospel in your system? And I'll tell you, I get to the gospel whenever I want to. Okay? Now, I know that sounds a little cheeky, but what I'm saying is I don't feel artificially compelled in some conversation as it's pulling to an end because the circumstances are changing, and I say, wait a minute, Jesus loves you, died for your sins. If you believe in Jesus, you go to heaven. If you don't believe in Jesus, you go to hell. Whew, not that out. Did my job. No, you didn't do your job. You just made a lot of religious noise in that person's ear, okay?
Oh. Stating the truth of the gospel, yes, is religious noise to the unbeliever, because the gospel is foolishness to those who are perishing.
I do not feel compelled to do that because I'm gardening, okay? I feel compelled to do what the circumstance needs. And this is where the game plan comes in. So now I'm going to make a promise to you for what I'm going to do in the next 35 minutes or so. I realize being the last of the morning, it's lunchtime afterwards. No other speakers that I'll be encroaching on if I go a little bit long. So in the remaining time, however long that...
You don't say that to your audience.
Is, I I am going to fulfill this promise. I am going to give you a game plan that will allow you to converse with confidence in any situation, no matter how little you know.
Isn't it amazing? Like, all of this is to build confidence in Christians that they can talk to non-Christians, not just atheists, any non-Christian. It's like, why do you, if you have the truth and it's so demonstrably clear and obvious, why are you even shy about it? I guess some people are just shy in general, I guess. But if you're passionate about it and you really do think it's true, I don't get why you would not want to share it.
Or how knowledgeable or aggressive or even obnoxious the other person happens to be, okay? The game plan follows an injunction that Paul makes in Colossians chapter 4, verse 5 and 6. So write that verse down, and you can look it up later, but I'll just tell you what it says right now. Colossians 4, verse 5 and 6. And here's what Paul says in that section, in that passage. He says, conduct yourself with wisdom towards outsiders, making the most of the opportunity. Okay, that's a good start. First he says, be smart. Great. Then he says, let your speech always be with grace, right? Seasoned as it were with salt. So he says, first be smart, then he says, be nice. What a concept. Then he closes with this, so that you know how to respond to each person. In other words, he says, be smart, then he says, be nice.
I thought it was the Holy Spirit's job to give you the words to speak to each individual person on how to witness to them the most effectively. It seems like Greg is promoting the idea that if you maybe use his technique, his methodology, that it might be better than what the Holy Spirit could give the Christian on a case-by-case basis? No, he can't be saying that.
Be tactical. In other words, people are individuals. They're in an individual set of circumstances. They have their own particular convictions. It may reflect what the culture believes, but they're nuances that are just their own. And what Paul is saying is you need to be sensitive to the individual's circumstances, their individual thinking, their individual way of addressing the issues of life. Well, how are you going to know that? Because you have to talk with them. Okay? And this is where the tactical game plan comes in. All right. Now, let me give you an example of how this played out in my own life a number of years ago. I grew up in Chicago, and we have some property in northern Wisconsin that my grandpa bought to retire on. It's a kind of a humble place on a little lake, and we call it the cabin, but people envision one thing, and that isn't what it is when I say cabin. It's more like the shack. We've done some work on it recently, so it's better than it used to be, which is great. It's under my control now. I got through the inheritance, so I'm responsible for it.
Fast forwarding a little bit.
Fish. I did as a kid, spent some summers up there, and in the 60s, and now I take my own daughters over there, my wife each year. We spend some time up there, okay? And I like to fish for bass, and especially smallmouth bass. Up in that neck of the woods, smallies can get pretty big. So I was out with the local pastor one day, and I caught the largest smallmouth bass of my life at the time, 4 pounds, 2 ounces. And man, was I proud of that fish. And now, just so you know, I have caught 8 fish over 5 pounds since then, just saying. In fact, one was 513. If that sucker would have eaten one more crawdad, I would have had 6, kind of thing. But I was really proud of that fish, and he took a picture of it, and I wanted to get the picture digitized so I could show it up on the big screen at his church where I was going to be preaching the following weekend, right? So my wife and I took the film, film, F-I-L-M. It's the kind of a thing that right, yeah, and then get it developed, okay, and digitized, put it on the screen. The gal who was serving us had a big pentagram hanging from her neck. Pentagram is a 5-pointed star. And
this is the problem with Greg Koukl that I see. This is my opinion. But this is why he's a horrible harvester and why he has to call himself a gardener. Because how many minutes are we in? Like, I know where this is going. This is going to the Columbo method, the Koukl method, this strategy. But he's taken half an hour to get here. And now he's telling a story that's taken 2-3 minutes.
Usually, or often, let's say, an occultic symbol. This looked like a real statement. So I asked her about it. I said, your jewelry, does that have religious significance, is what I asked. And she said, yes, the 5 points of the star stand for earth, wind, fire, water, and spirit, okay? Now, the bells are going off in my mind here, So,
yeah, bells, New Age.
Okay, this is an occult deal. And she begins to explain a little bit about it, and well, actually, what I say to her at that point is I say, well, I want to know, does it have spiritual significance for you personally? Because I know some people wear a cross and it's just jewelry, so I wasn't sure about this situation. And she said, yes, it does. I'm a pagan. Now, I'm a trained professional, right?
Did someone moan in the background?
Taking all this in. But my sweet wife was standing next to me. And when she heard this young lady call herself a pagan, it caught her by surprise, and she starts to laugh, right? And then she catches herself and says, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be rude, but I never heard anybody admit it before, like that. She'd only heard the word pagan when their girlfriends called her kids in. Get in here, a bunch of pagans, that kind of thing. And so the young lady was not offended. She began to explain a little bit more about it. And it suddenly occurred to me that I'm talking to a witch. And so I asked her, are you Wiccan? And she said, yes, I am. And then she began to explain some of the theology of Wicca. And she mentioned, for example, that we respect all life. And I thought,
do you guys know exactly where you were, what the weather was like the first time you talked to a witch?
oh, cool. If you respect all life, that would probably make you pro-life with regards to the abortion question. And she said, no, I'm not pro-life, I'm pro-choice. I said, really, isn't it odd for a witch to be pro-choice? And she said, well, it is, kind of. But then she says this, listen to the words. She said, I know I could never do that, referring to abortion. I could never kill a baby. Those were her words, not mine. She was characterizing abortion as baby killing. Now, it stands to reason we have training for teaching people how to deal with the pro-life issue. And we make the case with science and philosophy that abortion kills an innocent human being. Baby killing, if you will. But, we don't use that language because we don't want people to think we're using loaded rhetoric to make our case. We can make our case in a straightforward...
What? You're not willing to say that abortion is killing of babies? Why don't you have the backbone, Greg Koukl, to call a spade a spade? You don't use the word killing babies because I can show a picture of a 10, 12-day blastocyst and say that in vitro fertilization lab, that throwing that down the sink is not killing a baby. That's why you don't use it.
Fashion. But now I'm not the pro-lifer calling abortion baby killing. It is the pro-choicer who is calling abortion baby killing. And I am what? Listening. I'm listening. So am I going to talk about abortion here anymore? No. I'm going to talk about baby killing.
Yeah, so the whole point of this story is to show that in order to evangelize, you have to be a good listener. I would love to go have his 30 years of radio talk show, call-in show. What percentage of the time has he been talking and what percentage of the time he's been listening? I bet you, hey, what's his name? Tim? Tim, you work for Greg Koukl, right? And a couple other guys. There's a good chance one of you will be watching this later. What's your intuitions? What's your guess? What percentage of the time does Greg listen when he's on his radio show talking to sometimes unbelievers? And what percentage of the time is he just talking?
She says, I know I could never do that. I could never kill a baby. And then she gave the reason why. She said, I wouldn't want anything bad to come back on me. Maybe it's a karma deal. What goes around comes around. You do something bad, you get bad. Now, I don't know about you, but that strikes me as an odd reason not to kill babies. I'm not going to kill anybody. You never know what's going to happen to you if you start killing babies. Well, maybe we just shouldn't kill babies. I mean, whatever. So, but I didn't pursue that. Instead, I asked her, well, maybe you would kill babies, good. But maybe we should be stopping other people from killing babies. And she said, I think people should have a choice. Now, what is the choice that we were talking about here? The choice to kill babies. I mean, explicitly, the choice to kill babies. And that's what I asked her. You think people should have a choice to kill babies? And she said, well, I think all things should be taken into consideration. I said, okay, what is a consideration that would make it okay to kill a baby? And she immediately said incest, okay? Now, I want you to notice something about how this conversation is progressing. We end up talking about the abortion question, and her response to me, even though she believes abortion is baby killing, is to trot out a lot of pro-choice slogans without realizing that she's explicitly using the slogans to support what she acknowledges as baby killing, and it's starting to sound a little bit weird. But she doesn't hear it because she's not paying attention, in a sense, to her own words. She's sloganizing.
The irony, not paying attention to your own words. I think I even said that earlier on with Mike Licona.
This happens all the time. You'll hear people say things they've heard, or this is kind of the politically correct narrative, and they just pump it out without thinking about it. And Christians do the same thing, by the way. So now I have a question for her. I said, what if I had a 2-year-old? I didn't have any children at this time, but I said, if I had a 2-year-old that was standing next to me who had been conceived by incest, on your view, I should be allowed to kill this child. Is that right? Now, is that a fair application of her view? What do you think? It is. I think it's a very precise application of her view. And by the way, if I misunderstood it...
I just did a live stream on the topic of abortion. This is what Christians like Greg Koukl can't get, is there's such thing as more wrong or less wrong. It's like, in their head, it's binary. It's either wrong or it's not wrong, or it's either wrong or it's right.
I'm giving her a chance to correct me because I don't want to misrepresent her view, all right? But I didn't misrepresent it, and it stopped her in her tracks, and she got to thinking. And finally she says, after a long pause, she said, well, sorry for laughing, but she said, I'd have mixed feelings about killing the 2-year-old. I'd have mixed feelings about that.
Yeah, and I've asked Greg Koukl, would you rather God poof the children out of existence or drown them during the times of Noah? I'm not sure, but I think Greg Koukl might have use those exact words. I have mixed feelings about this, or I don't understand why God would have to do it this way. And sometimes these are tough things, tough problems. It's interesting how this can apply to his own beliefs.
And I'm thinking, well, I'm glad they're at least mixed. And maybe that was the point where I'm putting a stone in her shoe. It's hard to tell about these things. You don't always know what's going on in other people's minds. But I realize that the line behind me is beginning to grow. And I am now interfering with her work product. And so therefore, my opportunity as a gardener has come to an end. Now, had I been of a different point of view, I might think...
And you notice when he's talking about gardener, none of this story has to do with Jesus Christ and becoming a Christian. You can be against abortion. You don't have to be a pro-lifer. This has nothing to do with Christianity. There are Christians who are pro-life. There's Christians who are pro-choice. There are non-Christians who are pro-life. There's non-Christians who are pro-choice.
And I haven't got to the gospel yet. Sit down, shut up. You might learn something. Now, where was I? But I wasn't motivated, forced in my own sense to pursue that. I could just let it go and let the gardening that I did be something the Holy Spirit could use if the Holy Spirit wanted to use it. That's up to God, not me. And leave that witch in Wisconsin there, thank her for her help, and move on.
That's a T-shirt. Witch of Wisconsin.
Now, when we got in the car, my wife and I prayed for her, and I took a lot of notes because it was a great conversation, and I wanted to be able to talk about it like I'm doing here today. And that whole conversation, by the way, is in the tactics book because it's so illustrative of the power of the tactical approach. Now, I want you to notice something about that conversation. In that conversation, I used about 7 different questions. I used questions to initiate the conversation. I used questions to gather more information. I used questions to exploit what I thought was a weakness or a flaw. I trotted out the toddlers.
Yeah, he's describing what I do to cause people to leave Christianity.
Call it in the abortion talk that we do. We trotted out the toddler and tried to apply her reasoning about abortion to the toddler. It's very effective. Okay? And in my notes, when I get to this point in my notes...
I must say that as a gardener, I have never been as more effective as I am now. For the many years I've been doing this, I'm the most effective now than I've ever been. Applying the tactics that Greg Koukl is mentioning.
It says, originally it said, and she was doing most of the work. But I thought to myself, well, if she was doing most of the work, I was doing some of the work, and I wasn't doing some of the work. I was doing none of the work. This wasn't hard for me. I was relaxed. Okay? So I changed it. I said, she was doing all of the work. And I realized she wasn't doing any work either. There were no lines drawn in the sand. We weren't defending truth. Our dukes weren't up. We weren't arguing. It was pleasant. It was just a nice conversation. And that's the way I want it. And one of the reasons I want it that way, not only is it easier for me, but it's more effective. What happens if we get in a fight? What happens if I get mad? Which I have been known to do in the past.
Yes, 1, 2, 3, M. Neil. This does sound like street epistemology. He calls it the Columbo method. They're very similar.
Well, if I get mad, write this down. If I get mad, write this down. If I get mad, I lose. How about that? There it is.
Listening R and Raw.
Plain and simple. Because people aren't persuaded by angry folk. If I get mad, I lose. What if I don't get mad, but the other person gets mad at the content of what I'm saying? If they're getting mad because of the way I'm saying it, shame on me. But sometimes you're doing your best and they still get mad. Okay, that happens. Second part. If they get mad, I lose. How about this? If anybody...
If they get mad, I lose. Boy, and yet how many times have people gotten mad to you in the last 30 years, Greg Koukl? Does that still mean you're being effective? Oh, that's about gardening, not... sowing.
When he gets mad, I lose. You're thinking, why did he say that right off? So I didn't have to write all those other sentences down. By the way, this is a good principle for marriage. Guess there's not many married people in here. It's just harder to apply in marriage, but it's a good principle in all human relationships. If you get mad, if they get mad, you're not going to get something productive out of the circumstance. Sometimes you can't control whether another person gets mad on the other side, because they're getting mad because of the reasons, or the truth, or whatever that they're being exposed to. But in any event, I want this to be an amicable exchange, a friendly exchange, so that I can actually put a stone in their shoe, do some gardening, and leave the rest to the Lord, okay?
And I think he has a chapter in his book about what to do when people use this method against Christians. And I tell you, things change drastically when this method's used against them.
Okay, but I have a game plan that allows me to do that. Okay. Now,
yeah, Paul James. I was thinking the exact same thing. Paul James says, I thought Greg sounded mad talking to me when I called in. He was a little bit perturbed, and so was I. And according to Greg, if I was mad, I don't think I was mad, but it's just so infuriating. It's frustrating talking to a guy like Greg Koukl at least in his call-in show. Maybe he's a different person other than his call-in show. But Greg Koukl is a bloviating, loquacious man. It's like he needs to feel that he's barfing out information to help Christians. He desperately needs to do that. I guess this is his job, so he has to feel like he's earning his money.
This game plan has 3 different parts. I'm only going to give you 2 of those parts because of the limitation of time. But giving you the first 2 steps of the game plan is enough to get you going and satisfy my promise to you. And I'm just going to sketch out those first 2. And if you like the first 2, you might go to the 3rd step, which is a little more advanced, but you're going to have to get the book in order to do that. In fact, the book's been out for 10 years.
You have to get the book.
And last year I did the 10-year anniversary edition. It added about 35% more material, doubled the number of tactics in that book. And if you go to Amazon, which is probably the best way to get it because we don't have it in the back.
I would really, what's your guess, guys, how many books he's sold in his life? Would it be like 10,000, 5,000, 100,000? No, it wouldn't be that much.
Fortunately, it was a shipment problem. And I think I just broke 800 reviews now of the book that came out less than a year ago. And the average, well, that's just reviews. They could all say, you stink, right? 4.9 out of 5 is the average review. Okay.
I'm the most effective gardener that I've been in 30 years, and I've gotten 4.9 on the reviews of my book. Christians, even you can see this, right?
Okay.
Like, you don't have to be overly cynical like I am right now to see what he's doing.
Now, I'm not saying that to wave my own flag. I'm saying that because I want you to get the book and benefit.
I'm not saying this to wave my own flag. I'm saying this so you get my book.
Fit from the book the way those 800 reviewers have benefited from it. Because the number one state...
I promise you, Jessica 44, I will never, ever write a book
that I get from people that come up to me at events like this when they talk about tactics.
I bet you I've had more views, like way more views, and I'm not a big YouTuber, than books that he's sold.
The number one statement, I've heard it over and over and over, they said, this book has changed my life. And I'm not...
I was an alcoholic. I took crack. I took heroin. But then one day, I picked up Greg Koukl's book, and I found Jesus. Praise the Lord.
Surprised because the approach changed my life too. It's because there's a different perspective about how to do the project. It's gardening, not harvesting, and there's tools to do this effectively. So let me give you the first. Let me pause for a second. Okay, I'm going to back up. I'm getting ahead of myself. At Stand to Reason.
What happened there? I guess he does have notes, and he's lost his place.
In the tactics books, we have a bunch of different tactics. These are maneuvers in conversation that are meant to keep you in the driver's seat of the conversation. Not to manipulate people, not to talk too much. In fact, usually the other person's doing more talking using the game plan that I'm going to describe.
Why is it important for the Christian to be in the driver's seat? Because they don't like feeling stupid. They don't like being on the back foot. And when you're on the back foot and you feel stupid and you feel like the other person's running all over you, then it just feels bad. If Christianity is true, go ahead and feel stupid. It's okay. If Christianity is true, go ahead and be on the back foot. Let the atheist be in the driver's seat if Christianity is true. You be in the back seat because you got the truth. The atheist doesn't. The driver doesn't. This is what I don't get. And this is why I think guys like Greg Koukl are highly insecure about what they believe. Yeah, I said it. 30 years doing this stuff, or 40, well, how many years it was. And he's still like an insecure little child that needs to help people stay in the driver's seat because heaven forbid we go in the back seat. I don't want to be dismissed. I'm a little upset right now at Greg Koukl for just being a man with gray hair and feeling the need to be in the driver's seat. Let atheists make you look stupid. Let atheists trap you with their disingenuous questions. It doesn't matter. You have the truth. You have the Holy Spirit, and it is God who leads people to Christ, not humans. Stop being a baby. Okay, rant over.
But they're meant to keep you directing the conversation in the way you think is most effective. And we have tactics with names like suicide and taking the roof off, and just the facts, ma'am, and Road Scholar and Inside Out, and What a Friend We Have in Jesus. And these are all maneuvers that will help you in conversation, okay? But there is one tactic.
Yeah, not manipulation, but maneuvers.
Tactic that really turns out to be the core of the game plan that the other tactics serve, okay? And this is the simplest tactic imaginable: to stop a challenger in their tracks, to turn the tables, to get them thinking, and to put you back in the driver's seat of the conversation. And this tactic has a name, and the name of the tactic is Columbo, after the infamous Lieutenant Columbo of TV fame. So I'm going to just half dress myself here with.
Okay, it took at least half an hour to get here.
How many people here, like millennials and below, have never heard of Lieutenant Columbo? Okay, well, great. I'll tell you all about him right now, okay? Lieutenant Columbo is. Can you come up and help dress me, please? One of you. Well, come down, you come up. My wife's too far away. She put my socks on this morning. Thank you. Lieutenant Columbo shows up at the crime scene. He's a detective that. I don't know. I was thinking about this thing. He's a detective. I'm trying to get into character, okay? So you and I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, Joyce, you would think that if he is the most effective that he's ever been in 30 years, he doesn't need to push his book. In fact, he could just have his book in the front lobby there. And if people want it, they'll see it there. He doesn't have to push it.
He shows up at the crime scene. He wears his trench coat, right? It looks like he slept in it. I got mine at the Salvation Army. My wife is the thrift store queen, right? And so she tells me, whenever you buy something at the thrift store, you always got to check the pockets because you never know what you're going to find. Wait, what's this? Oh my gosh, look at that! Cigar. Lieutenant Columbo has a cigar, right? Now, don't worry, this is plastic. No problem. In fact, I hate cigars. Whenever I get a real cigar, I always destroy it by fire. All the way down, man. I don't want anybody to stumble, all right? He's also got a pad of paper. He can't use the pad of paper.
By the way, I'm going to leave it running. He's done this shtick so many times. It's unbelievable. I've seen this. He's basically saying that old show, Columbo, the way that the detective gets to the truth of the matter is by asking questions. And so that's the Columbo method. This is the great Koukl method. You ask questions like, what do you mean by that? Someone makes a claim. What do you mean by that? So it's very, very similar to street epistemology. I wonder if Great Koukl's actually inhaled a cigar ever in his life. I'm sure he has.
It's because I ask all these questions, but I can't help it. It's a habit. And this is the habit that Christians need to get into. The key to the Columbo tactic, and you can write this down.
Yeah, this is the habit that Christians need to do. I agree 100% with Great Koukl here. Christians listening, please, if you want to talk to a guy like me, ask me a short, simple question. One sentence. I don't know how many times, both in person or in my live stream comments, I'll have a Christian write out paragraphs and paragraphs with 3, 4, 5, 6 questions dispersed in between and expect me to answer them. Number one, you're a stranger to me and I don't care about you. Number two, if you want me to respond to a question, that's not a good tactic to use. And then if you can get yourself to stop vomiting stuff that you think I don't know, or any non-Christian, and if you can get yourself to ask that one question, and if once you've read the answer, don't feel the need to just barf out why that answer is wrong. Ask a follow-up question. If you think their answer is wrong, ask a follow-up question that might maneuver that person to realize that. Use Greg Koukl's strategy here, which is similar to street epistemology. Lead that person to the truth of Jesus Christ. Load that question in such a way that they can see the folly of their answer. Feel free to entrap me, or guys like me. Feel free to try to make me look stupid, but do it in a nice, civil way, like Greg Koukl said, and ask short, simple questions. And for the love of Yahweh, don't think we care about anything you have to say. Don't assume that. Now, if we ask a question back, that means we do care what you have to say, but only for that question. This is not just a Christian, non-Christian thing. This is a human thing. It's like humans they shut off their brain, the ears are plugged. They're just waiting for the mouth to stop so they can say what they want to say next. It's very difficult to do what I'm saying and what Greg Koukl is saying. Very difficult. But if you can remember the one principle that most people don't really care anything what you have to say, and be okay with it. If you're not okay with people not caring about you, maybe you got to work on yourself first.
And the very first step is to gather information. That's it. When you find yourself in a circumstance where you think you might be able to have some kind of impact for good, first, you got to get intel. You got to get information. You got to get the lay of the land. Okay? And without that, you're not going to move forward. Well, you might be moving forward, but you might be walking into a minefield, and you don't want that. Listen, there was a gentleman that was sitting next to me on an airplane. His name was John. And we started talking, and I'm using my game plan, drawing him out. I'm asking questions. Two kinds of questions, like what you want to find out about the individual,
who the
person is, or something about them, just friendly, and what they believe, if you can get that far. But as it turned out, he asked me where I was going, and I told him I was doing an event like this with Christians, etc. And he tells me, he says, I'm not a Christian. Well, is that good information for me to know? Yeah. Then he says, I used to be a Christian. Well, is that good information to know? Of course.
I used to be an atheist, says a lot of Christians. Someone actually moaned or groaned when he said that. This man used to be a Christian. No, that's not possible. If someone is a Christian, and no one can take the Christian out of the Father's hand, then they were never a true Christian to begin with, right?
Done that, and it hurt. But as it was, I didn't do that, obviously. I'm using my game plan. That's not my style. And I'm letting him talk and asking more questions to get more information. And he's unloading on this terrible experience that he had with Christians. And then he says...
Yeah. Reflecting the experience that so many former Christians have had. I was hurt in the church. I wanted to lead the college and career group, but they found out I was an old earth creationist or old earth theist, and they wouldn't let me, and I felt so betrayed and hurt.
That alone might have been a stone in his shoe. What do you think? Yes. Of course. I mean, you never know how these things are going to work out and how a small thing that you do is going to make a difference when you're gardening. Okay, now what I'd like to do is I'd like to give you a model question for the first use of Columbo. The first use of the game plan is to gather information.
Okay, I think the first model question is going to be, what do you mean by that?
It's the model question. It's some form of the question, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? When I saw the witch in Wisconsin, she was wearing this pendant. I asked her, what do you mean by that? Does that jewelry have religious significance for you? Okay, and that's how I got into a conversation. A lot of times you will already be you'll be touching on something.
So for those churches who can't afford to bring Greg Koukl in, I'm not sure what kind of fee he asked for. You can invite me. I'll do it for half price. Because I know what he's going to say before he says it.
By the way, do you take the Bible literally here in the church? And everybody's going, yeah, we take it literally. Oh, so you think Jesus is a stick? John 15, I'm the bush, right? Actually, that's not the word he uses, but you get my point. I'm the door, knock, knock, knock. Wait a minute. No. So do you take it literally or not? Well, it kind of depends, right? The problem that you got yourself into by spontaneously answering yes is that you shouldn't have answered yes. You should have done something else instead. You should have what? What do you mean by that? You should have asked a question. You should have gathered more information. And I'm just going to tell you, if you can get into the habit of every time you're talking to some skeptical person who's challenging you to keep asking for clarification, it's going to absolutely...
Whoa. Why apply this only... Well, I'm sure he didn't say this, but it kind of feels like he's saying you need to use this method more so for unbelievers. Why not use this amongst denominations? Like, or Roman Catholics, or Unitarians who don't believe in the Trinity. I encourage Christians to use the Columbo tactic, but don't just say it's for skeptics, which I think he means atheists. Maybe not. Use it for your fellow Christians who are post-trib instead of pre-trib. Use the Columbo method for those Christians like Licona who says it's the gist and that there might be some errors in the Bible and they don't take the Bible as fully inerrant necessarily. Use the Columbo tactic on guys like Mike Licona. Oh, this is so devilish what I'm saying, right? Because I'm saying use this method against your own beliefs.
Because everything's relative, I don't know that they know what they're talking about. So I'm going to ask them a question. What do you mean by relative? Everything's relative. What do you mean by that? And then they might explain what they mean by relative. I got another question. You said everything is relative. What do you mean by?
No, you don't say, let me help you, Greg Koukl. You don't say, and I'm at fault of this, you don't say, you said, and then fill in the blank. You say it this way. If I heard you correctly, I understood you to say this. See, like humans are very fragile emotionally. And so when you say, but you said, like I've been told that I do stuff like that way too much. So take my advice as a gardener of many years, who's never been more effective than I ever have been now, to build upon, improve upon Greg Koukl's Columbo tactics.
God, visibility, right? As John kept talking, I realized there were mines out there with him. There's a minefield. And now I could pick my way around the mines in my conversation with him, which is what I did. Okay, so first step of the game plan, just gather information. What do you do after that? Well, that's up to you. You may not go any further. I don't believe that every single encounter is a divine appointment. Some are just coincidental, right? They just happen. People pass in the night.
Yes, this is where Greg and I differ. I think every time I talk to a Christian, it is a divine appointment.
Down on yourself about it, all right? But if you have the opportunity and the person is expressing a point of view, the next step is, I call it reversing the burden of proof. So step 2, reverse the burden of proof. Now the burden of proof, just to make it clear, is the responsibility somebody...
So I have these active beliefs that determine how I live my life day to day, that go even beyond my death, but your goal should be to reverse the burden of proof. Because I'm tired. I'm speaking for the Christian. I'm tired of always having to defend it. Why don't you stinking atheists defend your worldview for once? They're tired. I tell you, Christians like Greg Koukl, evangelicals, they are tired. They are beat up. If you could see their spiritual body, it'd be full of bruises. They have been beat up badly the last 20 to 30 years. During the time where Greg Koukl has been the most effective.
For your view. And what if you don't have it? Then you're kind of stuck. So we're being cagey. We're being shrewd. We're just gathering now a different kind of information.
We're being cagey. We're being shrewd. Oh, I wish I could reverse this easily. I can, but I won't.
When the other person makes a claim against Christianity, Jesus never existed. You can't trust the Gospels as accurate records. This is what Mike did in the last session. God doesn't exist. The Bible's been changed.
This is going to bother Christians listening, but I'm going to speak to atheists right now. And I see this often. Atheists, when you're interacting with Christians, don't make any claims at all. This will bother them. They so badly want you to say something and claim it. And if you do claim something, you say, well, from my perspective, I'm not convinced the Gospels are reliable. And if they ask, why? What do you mean by that? Well, for one, Mark never told us that his source was Peter. I think a good historian would do something like that.
Blah, 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 you know, the drill. These are all claims against Christianity. The impulse, especially for people like me, who know a few things, is to say, you're wrong, I'm right, here's the reason you're wrong. What have I done? I have taken the responsibility of disproving their claim on me. And in so doing, I have given them a free ride. They have made the controversial claim, but...
Yeah, and this is why I love asking the flying man type questions. You know, if I say, well, I don't think Christianity is true. Claim. You don't believe Christianity is true. Why? What do you mean by that? Well, in my experience, people who die stay dead after 30 hours at least. Like... would you agree, Greg Koukl? In your experience, dead people stay dead? Well, but we have 500 witnesses and so forth that says this, and Jesus claimed to be God, and he predicted his own death. And they will start to barf out data and information that they think is strong evidence. And then you bring in the flying man. Well, would you believe that my great-grandfather could fly based on that particular type of evidence? No. But if you have a cumulative case, then I would.
I haven't requested of them to give me reasons why I should take the claim seriously. I'm jumping in and doing the blah, 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 blah.
Yes.
I've given that person a free ride. So here's the rule here, no more free rides. If anybody makes that, any of your friends, family, whatever in your circle, makes a claim of any kind against Christianity, your first impulse is to get clarification. And the question is, what do you mean by that? All in a chorus, all at once. Everyone together now. What do you mean by that? Okay, great. You're all such great students. The second thing is to ask this question. Now, how did you come to that conclusion?
Yes, how did you come to the conclusion that a man rose from the dead 2,000 years ago in bodily form? Well, because Paul said so. Ultimately, that's what you have. And then I would ask questions. My third question in my strategy to put a pebble in the Christian shoe is, well, if Joseph Smith said that Jesus appeared to him in bodily form, would you believe that? No, but Doug, he was a con man, blah, 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 blah. And then you just hear them say, but. But no, we're looking at one piece of evidence at a time.
How did you come to that conclusion? Now it's their turn again. What are you doing? Are you making claims? No. You're asking questions. You have nothing to defend.
The funny thing about all this is, if I am using street epistemology and Greg Koukl is using the Columbo method, and we meet head to head, neither one of us are going to make any claims. It's just going to be, hi, I see you wearing a cross. What does that mean? Oh, I just like this cross. Okay. Great weather we're having today, right? Yeah. It's going to rain tomorrow, I think. Well, what do you mean by that?
You're not the one talking. They are the ones that have to make an accounting. Now, I'm going to tell you a secret about these first two questions and what you'll encounter frequently when you use them. And it happens all the time. And just so you know, here comes a 60s alert. So fasten your seatbelts. When you ask, what do you mean by that? Or you ask, how did you come to that conclusion? You're going to get the sounds of silence. I call it the Simon and Garfunkel response, because they're the guys who wrote the song back in 1966. You're going to get dead air. This is the people that are raising all the objections. They're challenging like crazy. They got their sails filled with the wind of their convictions, and they're all like this. I'm not trying to put them down, but I'm talking to you.
What? Is silence? No. Maybe some people, but people like to hear the sound of their own voice, like Greg.
How those people are very confident. They challenge blah, blah, blah. But if you ask them, what do you mean by that? How did you come to that conclusion? You're just trying to get the goods, that's all. Fair questions, both. You'll be amazed at how often you get dead air. Simon and Garfunkel. And the wind goes right out of their sails because they don't know how to respond.
And that's what you want. You want to take the wind out of the sails of the atheists so you can feel more confident, so you can be in the driver's seat and control the conversation.
Make certain claims against Christianity and have not thought through them themselves. Again, this is true of both sides of the aisle. Sometimes people say, what if people use those questions against us? What do we do if somebody says, what do you mean by that? I said, do you think I mind that question? I'm sorry, Koukl, I want to know what you mean by that. Really? Great, sit down.
Yeah,
Relax.
Exactly. I know exactly what he's thinking. He's saying, I would love someone to say, what do you mean by that? Because I want you to sit down and relax, because I will barf information out to you for at least 30 minutes. Because I've been doing this a long time, and I know you care about everything I'm going to say. So listen closely, you skeptic, because I'm here to educate you. Let me tell you why I believe this. And then they'll assume that you have not heard what they're about to say. This is the thing. This is the crazy thing. As I know with probably, I'll be 80, 90% confidence that I know what these guys are going to say before they even say it. And I think that Greg Koukl if he has been doing this for decades, he will know what I'm going to say before I say it. So it basically comes down to a difference of opinion, a difference of what we value, a difference in, to use his words, worldviews. And at that point, it's like, okay, looks like we have to agree to disagree.
Garden well. And incidentally, you will never find an altar call in the New Testament. Never. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but that is a cultural form that developed in the mid-19th century, and we've adopted as our own. But we ought not be slavishly tied to it. Communicating the gospel or bits and pieces of it is great. That's the way.
Joystick Jedi says, you should go here tomorrow and sit in the front row. Yeah, this is like 45 minutes from where I live. Tomorrow is going to be Frank Turek. J. Warner Wallace, Frank Turek, and then panel discussion and Q&A. But it's only an hour? The thing is, it's going to be more frustrating because I personally could take up the whole hour of the panel discussion and asking questions of the panel. Maybe, no, that's just not fair. But I wonder how many non-believers are here right now listening. Not too many. Because the thing is, because I could go there and ask them questions. And for the most part, unless I ask thought experiments, I know what they're already going to say. And a lot of the thought experiments, I already know what they're going to say. So it comes to a point where it's just a waste of time. I can do more good by watching it on live stream and giving my thoughts. And that there will be some Christians listening where I will indeed put a pebble in their shoe, because even though they might disagree with me 9 times out of 10, I'm going to say that one thing that they're going to agree with, and it's going to make them more likely to listen to me the next time. And this is what apologists, in my opinion, like Greg Koukl, don't want to have happen.
Okay. And so I encourage you, for some of you who are just kind of getting started in this, fine. In the next month or two, don't worry about getting to the end game. Just start using those 2 questions, and you be a student now of other people's ideas. It's all you want to do. And as you're a student, what do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion? You are going to get an education, and you will probably be surprised in 2 ways. One, you're surprised that these folks that you thought were so scary aren't so scary anymore when you're listening to what they have to say and you're interacting with them, okay? There's a humanizing process there, which is what Paul had in mind in Colossians 4, so you know how to respond to each person. There's a humanizing process there that takes some of the fright out of it.
Get tickets.
Okay? So you'll realize they're not as scary as you thought. Here's the second thing you'll realize. They're not as smart as you thought.
Oh.
Remember in the book of Numbers when the spies went into the land? Oh, it's a beautiful land.
This is it too. Part of the job of apologists is to say, hey, Christians, those atheists are not as smart as they sound or what you think they are. We're smart too. You don't have to feel stupid. I'm a big believer that Christians in general are way more insecure than the average human being. I should say all religious people. It's like when you're free of that cognitive dissonance, when you're willing to say, I don't know, to the big questions of life, and that you're basically not going to actively believe things with high degrees of confidence unless it's demonstrably true. It's like, it's so freeing. You don't have to be insecure at that point. But you see this time and time again where Christians will say, see, that guy, I asked this atheist a question, he didn't know the answer. That shows that our religion is more likely to be true, right?
Fulfilled my promise to you. Because I said I would teach you a game plan that would allow you to converse with confidence in any situation, no matter how little you know, or how knowledgeable or aggressive or even obnoxious the other person happens to be. And now you have that.
Okay, let's see. Yeah, he's finally done. And I'm sure at the end of it, he said, buy my book. It's in the back. Okay, let me get rid of that. Any final thoughts or questions from people listening? How long was that? 2 hours, 55 minutes. So for those of you who came late, that was my former church that I went to, that stage, where I helped lead worship for 3 to 4 years. Gay plan. No, Camille, he said game plan, not gay plan. Camille saying there's an after show on Discord if someone wants to go there. If you had to ask one question, what would you ask? PineCreek, you should write a book that parodies a Licona or Koukl book. No, I don't understand why people like writing books. Like even Frank Turek said that anybody can write a book, and if you write a book, you can get into any church because they think you know something. No, it's... Don't get me started on books. Reading paper books from start to finish is the most inefficient use of time. Now, if you're just doing it for entertainment, that's a different thing. But if you're doing it to get information, digital books are fine because you can hit the Control F button and search for the answers you're looking for. But so many books have so much fluff. Like even Greg Koukl's speech here, you can condense that right down to like 10 minutes instead of 45 or 50 minutes. I'm gonna keep streaming here so I can get 3 hours on the screen. So another 4 minutes. Can you give us Frank's sermons tomorrow? Oh yeah, what Frank's going to talk about tomorrow is I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. He's going to do more of the presuppositional type arguments. Like how can you count for truth, morality, it's just your opinion, moist robots. Book it. I said it. I believe it. Book it. That's what Frank Turek's going to talk about tomorrow. One reason why I would want to go tomorrow is just to see who's there. There's a chance Inspiring Philosophy will be there because he lives in Tucson. And I probably would recognize some people there. But as far as... like, I'm not going to drive across town, listen for 3 hours for the hopes to ask one gotcha question to make Frank Turek look like an idiot. That's the best case scenario. And because of COVID, I don't think I can actually sit down with these guys. And there's no chance I can get in because it's like you got to buy tickets. But hey, Frank Turek, Mike Licona, Greg Koukl, if you see this live stream and you can get me in for sure without a ticket, email me at dll1671@yahoo.com. If you personally invite me, I'll be there. And if you want to talk after, let's see. I know where we can go. I know all the restaurants in that area. I'll even drive to the restaurant. Yeah, that would be fun. I want to go out to eat with Licona, Koukl, Turek, J. Warner Wallace. I'm sure all four of those guys know me or know of me. Say my name. I've been actually feeling a little sorry for Mike Licona because of what's happened to his daughter. And I think the day Camille and I made that video on Mike Licona, his daughter tried to commit suicide, I felt like, sorry. That's another thing. Like, if I go, I don't have a camera like these other people do, like these street epistemologists do. I just have my smartphone, which I could use to record, but it wouldn't be good quality, I don't think. Or but if I do go out to eat with them, if they see this live stream and invite me, actually, Licona, the organizers of this event, if they ask me to sit on the panel, I'm there. All these Christian apologists and then PineCreek at the end. It'd be way more entertaining than taking questions from the audience. Four apologists against me? That's the definition of fair. Because I'm not going to make claims. I'm going to ask questions. Oh, I'll even tell you up front, I don't have to hide anything. If I was up there with the panel of four, and I know all four of them pretty well, I'd pit them against each other. Oh, so nasty. I would find beliefs that they disagree on and ask them, well, what do you mean by that? How did you come to that conclusion? Because I think Koukl leans Calvinist like Kona doesn't. Oh, that'd be so much fun. Okay, so Licona, Turek, Koukl, J. Warner Wallace, DLL1671 at yahoo.com. If you see this, email me, invite me personally to come over. I'll be there tomorrow, and we'll go out for coffee or something, or at the show. I'll be on the panel. I don't know, whatever. Email me.